Hey, welcome back to the Black Ibis Social Club. It's me, Alexander Constantine, the host of Substack's best podcast, right? And we got co-host Mr. Fisto Sobani. What up, dude?
Hello, hello. How are you?
Pretty good. And then today's guest, who wandered in from the streets, is Mr. Copernican, a fellow Substacker. What's up, Copernican?
Hey, it's great to see you guys. Thanks for taking me in.
Oh, of course, man. Grab a seat, grab some coffee. I just actually brewed a cup of coffee. I bought the beans and ground them down and used my little Biletti espresso maker thing, stovetop one. But I got the beans from Aldi and they're actually really good. I'm surprised by the quality of Aldi coffee. It's pretty good.
Sounds nice.
Yeah, this was like, shut up,
All,
dude.
all these got tons of good stuff, man.
Dude,
I miss
Aldi's,
the fact I don't have one near me. It makes me very upset.
Aldi's got banger stuff. You know what I don't have near me? I don't have a Trader Joe's, and that makes this hipster soul individual in me sad that there's no Trader Joe's because I have
I'm
nowhere.
judging you for that right now. I'm judging you
I
for
have
that.
nowhere to use my tote bag, and like I can't park my Tesla anymore. Or Teslas are not cool anymore in the hipster
No,
world.
it's fine. They
Yeah,
just might randomly explode and or be set on fire,
right.
so it's fine. Don't
You
worry
know,
about it.
I've never had a
It mostly,
Tesla.
it's a mostly peaceful fire though.
Mhm.
Yeah, mostly peaceful fire. Yes, like all
Mostly.
fires, like that star in the sky. It's mostly peaceful.
Well,
Just don't get too close.
the irony of liberals blowing up other liberals' cars is just
Oh
interesting.
my God, right? Yeah, like
It's
who
such a kick out of it.
Yeah, who do they think bought those things? It was a bunch of your
Right.
buddies, and now you're
Yeah.
what, like purging them because of their unbelief,
Well,
and how
but
dare you?
but that's Animal Farm for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Four legs
Right.
good, two Teslas, bah.
Yeah, I made a comment on Twitter just maybe
Yeah,
like
it's
half
hilarious.
an hour ago on X or whatever, and I was like, people don't understand that, like the Tesla hate has nothing to do with like Elon Musk or any of that stuff, right? I don't even fucking like Teslas. Okay, I will never drive one. I think they're ugly. They remind me of like a friend of mine bought one and I rode in one, and I was like, this is ugly. I don't like it. The interior felt like an Apple store, and if it looks like the Star Tours like car, I don't like it, right? Um,
I've said this a few times. If I can, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a car from the 1980s or 70s and rebuild the whole damn thing because I want a stick shift transmission and a carburetor,
right.
and I
Yeah.
don't want electric nonsense in my vehicle, and I don't want a computer in my vehicle. I'm sick of
Right.
it.
Yeah.
My car right now has I think 12 computers in it. My
Oh,
Toyota my
what
Toyota RAV4,
what the
which
what the hell is that? Like the slopification of all things continues, and it's even automobiles.
right
The
I
term the term that I've
Just
heard and used is enshittification.
mhm.
yeah. That's a good one. That's a good one. I feel the need to get back to an old vehicle because mine is in the shop right now. It's been there since Monday morning and they still don't know what's wrong with it.
So, all right, I do have a
It's
recommendation
like,
though. If
kill
you're
me.
into if you want an old vehicle without extra computer components in it,
Yes.
old cars that run are expensive right now. All right,
Oh,
and
I'm
that's
sure.
the way it's going to be for a long time. But a motorcycle from like the 90s or early 2000s,
Oh, that's pretty smart.
those things are pennies, and we're talking like a bike that you would imagine would be 10 or $12,000 is selling for 2,000 right now because a bunch of
Yeah,
boomers bought them in like 2003 to 2008
right.
and never rode them. So they've got no miles on them or like 200 miles on them or something, and they're being sold for pennies, especially like if you look for a Kawasaki or a Honda motorcycle, and they have most of the
Oh,
electronics long gone because they were designed without them because they were tiny little motorcycles, not cars with computers to put in them. So if you have a motorcycle license or endorsement, motorcycle endorsement, or you want to get a motorcycle endorsement,
yeah,
like
it wouldn't be
for the
too tough.
next for the next 2 or 3 years, we're in sort of the golden age of used motorcycles in the United States.
That's a good point.
That's
Yeah.
that's a great hot tip. Hot tips right here at the Black Ibis Social Club.
So I've never rode a motorcycle before, and it's interesting. All my friends growing up in my 20s rode motorcycles, and most of them actually were women. They were girls. Some of my best girlfriends were all motorcycle girls. A friend of mine, she rode a Honda Shadow from Los Angeles all the way to New Mexico.
Nice.
Like, and that's all she would ever ride. I had another girlfriend that had a Ducati Monster that she rode every day, and I never got into it because I will admit it here, man. I am a bit of a retard, you know? I space out, I zone out when I drive. It's like a, just a, it's how I drive using, I'm like Luke Skywalker, man, with the
It's a
helmet thing
meditative.
down. Yeah,
It's
it's
a
a very,
meditative
Yeah, it is.
yeah.
experience.
And I sometimes I have like, the opposite of deja vu where I'm like, what? Where am I? I've never been here before, you know? Where it's like a same route I've taken a million
Mhm.
times. I just do it with my eyes closed. But which brings me to a segue because I got to tell everybody the story now of how I almost went to jail yesterday and how I currently do not have a driver's license because it's suspended.
Oh no.
Right. So I'm
I was
technically
wondering, I was wondering how this whole DMV thing was going to come into
all right,
play
so
here
I'm
when you
technically not
mentioned
allowed
it
to
earlier.
drive right now, and I just got off the phone with the South Carolina state senator from my district because I had to call the state senate office to yell and scream and make a scene. Um,
Right.
so, okay, about a week and a half ago, my wife got into a little parking lot fender bender at Aldi, actually, buying the coffee I'm drinking right now. It was a rainy day, and she went around a big SUV and kind of clipped a parked car. And I was like, haha, you clipped a car in a parking lot on Women's Day or whatever, whatever. It was no big deal. But
Right.
because and she filed the police report and the cop came out there to take the info. And I wanted her to do that because I didn't want whoever's car she clipped to be like, oh my God, you totaled my transmission. You know what I mean? Right?
Yeah.
When it was just a scratch and I don't have to pay for that,
Mhm.
right? And anyways,
Right.
that was no big deal. But when the cop came, he ran, her license, registration, and insurance, and was like, "Oh, hey, your insurance is valid, 100% for me." But for some reason, the state of South Carolina DMV says that they don't have a record of it. And she's like, "Well, that's weird. Okay, well, I'll go fix it." So the next day, she drives by the DMV. It's on her way to dropping off my daughter, ducks in, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we don't have your insurance on file, but your husband has to bring it in because he's the primary holder and owner of the cars." Whatever. Week passes. I'm like, that's no big deal. Who cares, right? Obviously, the cops didn't give a shit, right? So I leave work early yesterday. I go to the DNB, and I've got my, insurance cards and all that stuff with me. I'm like, "Hey, I'm here to show you guys my insurance, so I'm not flagged for whatever." And the semi-literate, subhuman IQ individual is like, "Oh, your license is suspended." I'm like, "The fuck you say? My license is suspended?" "Oh yeah, yeah, we've suspended your license because you didn't have insurance on your car." And I'm like, "Well, I do have insurance on my car, and I did have insurance on my car. As you can see, there's a insurance card in my hand that says I'm insured from, the whole year from October to October, and this supposed suspension of my license happened well into this period. And not only that, but you you gave me a license plate and stickers for both my cars like a month ago, dude, using this exact form." And they're
Hmm.
like, "Oh no, see, your insurance company has to like send the info to us." And I'm like,
Classic.
"Oh," I'm like, "Okay, well, how about you fix it? Here's my insurance card and my policy numbers and stuff." They're like, "Oh
Right.
no, no, we can't take that." I'm like, "What do you mean you can't take the legal?" "Well, because I don't know." I'm like, "Okay, so you don't know why you can't take the legal document that says state of South Carolina on it?" All right, I go, "So this paper I'm holding in my hand, if I were to get in a car accident or get pulled over by the police, they could take it. They obviously took it from my wife 3 days ago,
Yeah.
and they can run the numbers in their DMV system that they have in their cars that tells them that it's valid, right?" He's like, "Yes, but you can't fucking take it." "No." I'm like, "Okay, well then who do I give it to?" "Oh, well, you don't give it to anybody. The insurance company does." And I'm like, "Oh, and you have to pay $200 today." I'm like, "So let me get this straight. You cancel my driver's license for not having insurance when I do have insurance. I come here to prove to you that I do have insurance and always had insurance, but you can't take my proof, but I have to pay $200 and you still won't reinstate my license." He's like, "Yes." I'm like, "You're fucking retarded, dude." I go, like, you are like, this is like state extortion,
Yeah,
right?
that sounds about right.
And this is the manager that I like. summoned over there, right? And this is like this like 4'9" fucking goblin, you know, with like chin pubes on his fucking face and stuff. This little scrawny little disgusting white guy who I wanted to grab him by the fucking head and just shove my fucking thumbs into his eyeballs until his jelly popped, right? You know, I'm like, huh, I'm losing it, right? Like I'm obviously irritated. I go, so
Oh,
I have
no.
here I have legal proof of my insurance, but you won't take it. But there's no way for me to like to give it to you. He's like, well, I mean, I don't set the rules, sir. I go,
Right.
but
Yeah.
you're the DNV. You're the
If you
people.
want to know what a managerial bureaucracy looks like, imagine an overweight middle-aged childless woman telling you that's against policy forever.
Right, right. You know, so I've got this fucking like mutant here, like with like this bug man, like the prototypical just,
Yeah.
you know, sludge, like human yeast, to quote Bap, you know, like this human yeast of a man, and this like fucking Shaniqua, like sitting here with her like slicked back hair and like giant nails. And I'm like, I fucking hate both of you. I like, and I'm like, this is why nobody's sad that Elon Musk is going to fire all you people and you're going to starve to death. Like, for real. For real. And then everybody clapped. No, it didn't happen. But they asked me to leave, right? They're like, sir, can you please leave? I'm like, yeah, fuck you. And
If I leave, does that mean I don't have to pay you $200?
well, I'm not paying $200, man.
Yeah,
You know,
fuck 'em.
it's
Fuck 'em.
like straight up like state extortion. Like literally, you make a mistake and you charge me for it so you can fix it, but you still can't fix it. So
Yeah.
I've spent the last 48 hours. I called my insurance company. So I don't have like Boduck fucking Juan's insurance company. I have USAA, right? It's a fucking national insurance company,
Yeah,
right?
somebody fucked up over there. Somebody forgot to press a button.
So I called them and they're like, we don't know what the fuck you're talking about, dude. We've sent all this stuff, right? You know, and I'm like, okay. They're like, we have no idea. We can resend it again and again and again for if you want. So they did. Still, I called today, nothing, right? They still don't have anything in their system. I'm like, well, can you check the system? They're like, oh, we don't have access to that. It like goes into another system and then it communicates to us. I'm like, so you don't even have access to the system that the insurance companies or the police use, but you cancel my driver's license. All right. This is after like a 45 to an hour, like on the phone hold to even talk to somebody, right? And then I told after like the seventh call, right? Because I just keep on calling until these guys
Yeah,
are
that's
like,
how you do it.
you know, and after I go, can you check? I go, so first of all, it's not like I just got new insurance, right? I've had this car for 6 years. It's a 2019 RAV4, right? And I bought this thing. Yeah, I bought it like when RAV4s came out. And I've had the same insurance policy on this fucking car since the day I drove it off the lot, right? It has not changed once, right?
Mhm.
And the guy's like, I'm like, can you check the insurance policy and the status of my Toyota Corolla that I also own? And he's like, oh yeah, that's all in order, sir. Everything's great. I'm like, it's the same fucking policy, you fucking retard. Right? Like it's the same policy number. It is the same identical policy number, right? So it's like and they're like, I'm like, do I need insurance to get license? I mean, a license plate and a sticker from you guys? They're like, yeah. So when you gave me a license plate and stickers, I obviously showed you my insurance, right? And they're like, well, yes. And I'm like, then what the fuck are you guys cancel my what? You know what I mean, right? And like, who can I talk to? Who made the decision? Oh, well, nobody, sir. Nobody, sir. So, anyways, I called the freaking state senator's office, right?
Mhm.
And they
Mhm.
called me back, and they're like, "Sir, we'll look into it, blah blah blah, and all this stuff, you know." So we'll see how that goes. So like, I'm in this limbo. Like they vetoed. Well, they suspended my license. They don't know why. The insurance company doesn't know why. The insurance
So
company, it's just insane.
I have a recommendation. I don't know if it'll work, but I do. But um, oftentimes cities have a traffic judge,
That's a good idea.
and if you go to the traffic judge and explain to him what this problem is or her, probably, there's a good chance they will call the DMV and yell at them,
Yeah.
and the DMV will then fix it.
Yeah. Well, the senator's executive assistant said that
The
they're calling.
problem is you always have to find Yeah, the problem is you always have to find weird leverage points in bureaucracies like this to get anything
Right.
done.
Right.
Uh,
You know,
My favorite one is a friend of mine was making a plaque or a trophy for a state agency, and they ordered it, they paid for it, and then he said, "All right, great, it's done. So where should I mail it to?" And it took them 6 months to give him an address to mail it to.
jeez, you know, well, it
Just
makes you, it
just
makes
late
you just,
Republic things. Just late Republic
yeah,
things.
you know, and I took the day off from work today to deal with this. I didn't get anything done, of course, right? And luckily, a beautiful day in South Carolina. We went to the beach, my wife and I, to kill time and walked around on the beach, and it was wonderful. So there was some silver lining to the whole situation. Um, but what I don't know exactly, like it's so Kafkaesque, right? Like I'm stuck in this thing where like I have insurance, I want to give them proof, but they won't take it. We got some audio in the back there somewhere from somebody.
Yeah, you're good. Go ahead.
What's going on?
We got some audio in the
It's not
background.
me.
Fisto, something's audible in your background.
I oh, I don't even know what it would be.
Okay, maybe I don't know.
My
Maybe it's
computer was doing something weird.
okay. Maybe that was it. Maybe some interesting.
Now listen, in the middle of your yeah, well, in the middle of your story, I don't even know if you noticed, but my computer rebooted.
Oh, that could
Your
probably be
I
it.
incandescent
did notice,
rage.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, your
yeah.
incandescent rage.
Yeah, that was my day. So, I just, I wanted to get
We'll
out
see.
off my chest, because for a second there, I was like, man, maybe all those people that are going to get laid off, it kind of sucks about the Doge thing or whatever. And now I don't feel bad about it at all anymore. Now I'm like, yeah, fire everybody. Everybody needs to go away. Just fuck them all. I hope their
Just get
children
rid of it
The,
all.
the
starve.
goal of managerialism is to turn humanity into a set of spreadsheets.
Right, right. Well, and my wife and I were talking about this, right? And she's like, "Well, why is it like this? Why, because there's a logic to the law, right? Like looking into it, I go, I see what they're doing, right? The problem is that pieces of shit will go to the DNV with fake ass insurance cards, right? Or shifty insurance companies that they have insurance for like 1 month. They do that to register their cars and then they get rid of their insurance and they drive without insurance. So the state of South Carolina made a workaround by having a database that goes, that gets constantly updated from the insurance companies. So it's a law that is really a late stage republic law. You know what I mean? Uh, it's a non open society, a non-truthful society law. And that's the problem, right? The problem is that a lot of our institutions worked in the past because we had a high trust society where, you showed up to the DMV, you took a silly test, you showed your driver's license registration or whatever, your insurance, and everybody did it. Everybody followed the fucking law. But in the last 30, 40 years, that's all gone to shit. And everybody's a scammer and everybody's a scumbag. So now we have to have laws that affect everybody across the board. And the people that get, the people that get caught up in these Kafkaesque laws are people like me that do follow the law, that do follow the rules, that do everything right. And we don't have any means of redress, right? Because in societies like Mexico, for example, or other third world South American or, whatever Southeast Asian countries and stuff, the assumption is that when you deal with a government agency or a government thing is that they're going to rip you off, that they're scumbags across the board. That's always the assumption. Every interaction with everybody is the assumption is this guy's going to try to get something on me and vice versa, right? So because they have that known adjustment, they come into the transaction with like extra money to pay the corrupt cops or the corrupt clerk behind the desk to give you that extra stamp or to file your paper in the right pile instead of the trash, right? And that's the assumption in these countries, right? And now that's happening to the United States, and people that are honest and decent don't have a mode of redress because these laws aren't meant for us. They're meant to, suppress the natural impulses of scumbags from different cultures. You know what I mean? That's my theory.
Well, we've sort of reached the point in the United States, and this happens in a lot of third world countries. And we're still running off a lot of cultural momentum, but there is a point where it becomes common knowledge that if you're not cheating, you're not playing to win.
Exactly.
Um, and that's sort of the point that we're beginning to see in the United States. And so what you're going to end up with is a lot more people willing to cheat. Now, what's going on with the current administration with Doge and the locking down of federal funding is going to radically reshape the American economy. I think a lot more than people are aware, because the United States was about 30% of the U.S. GDP was public spending, um, until very recently, and it's still going to be quite high as percent GDP is going to be public spending, but hopefully they can knock it down to like 20%, 15% of US
Right.
GDP being public spending. In the United Kingdom and like Canada, I think it's close to 50% of their entire GDP is public spending. Um,
That's
at
wild.
which point you live in a Soviet, sort of a Soviet Union style economy.
Yeah, that's not
In
an
the US,
economy because you're
yeah,
not.
it's
I
not an
mean,
economy, it's a
it's yeah,
government.
that's yeah, exactly. It's. I don't even know what you call that, but it's not good.
I
It's
would
not
just
going to
I
last
would
very
just call it
long.
a Soviet economy.
Yeah,
It can last a few generations before they run out of other people's money to spend. Um,
yeah,
but the issue in the United States is that until very recently, a significant percentage of business models have been built on getting free public money because there was so much of it. Um, and now that the public money fountain is drying up, hopefully, we're going to have to see businesses that are actually in some way productive. And that will force bad actors into worse conditions if the standard is productivity rather than acquisition.
Right. Right. I mean, and then that's it has to be the way we're going. You know, there's absolutely no other way because a lot of these institutions are propped by, arcane accounting tricks and arcane like funding loopholes and grants and that type of thing. And it's if you have to show results, these people can't. They can't show positive results. So it's never going to be sustainable for those kind of people, you know?
Yeah, in the United States, and what I've said on other podcasts and in my articles is that the U.S. is going through an imperial transition. We're transitioning
100%.
from a republic with sort of a standard for citizenship and rule of law to an empire, which is going to be much more hierarchy based and where the executive branch is going to have a lot more power. So already we're seeing the executive branch and the judicial branch effectively attempting to seize control of the United States government in various complicated ways. And I suspect that within 20, 30, 40 years, the legislative branch will have effectively been cut out of governance.
Right.
Yeah, they'll be there just for show. I mean, they
Yeah,
kind of already are in so
and,
much as
and that's what
there's
it was
no.
like.
Yeah,
That's what it was like in Rome. Our the United States political system is based almost perfectly on the Roman political system, with some modifications and some more separation of power, which is why I think Trump won this last election instead of getting knifed by the Senate. Um, but the the way in which our structures reform themselves during a period of stress is going to be very similar to how the Roman systems were reformed. And the Senate in Rome lasted hundreds of years after it stopped being an effective political entity.
right. Yeah, it was just there for show.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting because, right now in the news, and well, I say the word news, but what I really mean is in the discourse, right? The issues with the judicial branch is kind of front and center. And one thing I have never been a big fan of the judicial branch, and I don't like it. In principle, I understand what the Supreme Court does. That the idea is that they review every action to like they put it to the litmus test of the Constitution, and in that sense, I like their purpose. But in practice, we haven't seen that. And in practice, historically, in the 20th century and in the 21st century, the Supreme Court has used their power to basically push through societal changing, actions, whether it was Civil Rights Act, Roe versus Wade, and all that whole thing, across the across the board, which often go against the will of the people or the majority will of the Americans. And I'm not a fan of that. So I lived in California, right? And in California, they were all about democracy. We want, straight up democracy, 100%. I know we are a republic, but we want democracy, right? Will of the people. And they passed, I believe in the early 90s or late 80s, the, what's it called? The referendum system, right? If you guys are familiar with that at all.
Go on.
So in California, right, there's a referendum system where if you choose an issue, right, and if you get there's a required amount of signatures, like I don't know, 1 million or 200,000 or something like that, right?
Yes. This is familiar now.
This is a public referendum. You put forth a proposal, you get the 200,000 or whatever signatures. You guys can look it up to see how many you need, and it becomes a ballot box issue, right? So when you go to vote in the state of California, whether it's a state election or a federal election, your voting book is like 50 pages, right? Because it's 1 million like referendums, right? And most of them are stupid. They're like, local type issues and stuff, right? Like public fund, like appropriations and stuff, but they're direct democracy. But a few of them are big, high impact, high item things, right? For example, funding the bullet train from Los Angeles to San Francisco was actually a state referendum. Like, the state of California, the citizens of California voted for a bullet train. The corruption came in afterwards, where the bullet train became one from Barstow to bumfuck nowhere, and none of it happened. And it was a failure of the state government to even implement what the Californians voted for. But there was there was one major one in my lifetime and my life as a Californian, where one of them was Proposition 8. So Proposition 8 was a referendum on a state of California that said that marriage is between man and a woman, right? So if you were on Prop 8, right, you believed that the state of California will only define marriage as a relationship between a man and a woman, right? And there will be no gay marriage. This is ahead of time, right?
Yeah, this was a long time ago.
Right. This was it wasn't that long ago. It was it was around 2008, 2009-ish, right? First Obama term. Right? I remember this specifically because I remember seeing all the bumper stickers, and it was huge.
Yeah, but that was 15 years ago.
Okay, yeah, I'm old. Sorry. Yeah, it was about 15 years ago, right? Anyways, there was a huge thing in California, movie stars and people, kind of falling on both sides of it and that type of thing. Well, the Proposition 8 basically unanimously, overwhelmingly passed. So Californians, right? Californian citizens voted against gay marriage. They voted to codify that marriage in the state of California is between a man and a woman. All right. This is Californians during Barack Obama's presidency voted against gay marriage. Right? Okay. The will of the people, democracy, direct fucking democracy happened. Right. And then some fuck of a judge overturned it. Of course, the judge was a homosexual, right? Mm-hmm. And he said it's unconstitutional, overturned it. So the will of the people was completely overrun by one man in the California Supreme Court, right? You had the same exact example happen in 1994 for another proposition, which voted to close the borders and not give state assistance and medical rights and that kind of stuff to illegal immigrants. Once again, overwhelmingly passed from the voters of California. Once again, overrode by a state judge, right? So it seems that the judicial branch is really an anti-democratic element in our system that I just don't see any way to defend it if you truly do believe in democracy,
Well, with what you're describing and what I've been seeing in the news recently about all these different executive orders being blocked or stopped or whatever is actually going on. It brings me back to what Copernican said at the beginning of the podcast. If you're not cheating, you're not playing to win.
Right, right.
And now we're seeing how the judicial branch has been, caught up in that.
Well, it feels like this. It's like there's a level of pretense that we have to being an American democracy, right? Whether you believe in it or not, I don't, maybe, my views are whatever, right, on the whole thing. But if we're gonna pretend, if we're gonna have this pretense, right, we have a president that overwhelmingly won the majority votes and the electoral college votes, right? It was
So I would actually argue it's a little more complex than that.
Sure,
with
go
the
ahead.
judicial, because the judicial system's basically split between left-wing activist judges and judges. And the executive branch, however, has been given basically imperial power at this point by Congress by accident over a period of time. Like DOGE was the United States Digital Service, USDS, and
Mhm.
Congress gave it the power to dig into other agencies and edit their records and do all kinds of things that DOGE is currently doing. But Congress is the one that created the USDS and funded it, which is why they can't turn it off, which is hilarious. The executive branch then decides how to enforce the things that Congress says they want. And Congress has basically started getting lazy in the 60s and 70s and has started writing more and more vague laws, which effectively mean that the executive branch has more and more authority in how, when, where, and why those laws are enforced. And so that's why we have so many federal agencies interpreting policy, quote unquote,
Right.
because they're allowed to. Now, in the most recent federal court case, it wasn't Bruin. Which one was it? It might have been Bruin. Chevron deference was overturned. And Chevron deference is what gave agencies the ability to make radical reinterpretations of the legal mandate that they have. So the overturning of Chevron deference supposedly significantly limits federal executive authority. But because Congress has been so lazy and vague in the way they've been writing laws for the past half century, what it actually does in implementation is it simply limits the things that have very clear legislative power behind them. So things like the National Firearms Act, for instance, although that's already been beat up by a couple of judges, thank God. But the executive branch has a tremendous amount of power at this point, solely because the legislative branch has handed it a tremendous amount of power. And mostly that's because legislators and lobbyists have been lazy, and lobbyists are in a position where they can then get hired at the upper levels of these agencies, which means they can determine how those laws are enforced, and then they can go right back through the revolving door and work in the industry that's being regulated.
Right.
Judges are in a position where there's too many activist judges to ignore at this point, and their ability to input national injunctions against the legal authority of the executive branch have become a problem. So what we're seeing right now is best described as a struggle between half the judicial branch and the executive branch for the power to control the country. And I suspect the executive branch is going to end up winning, but it's probably going to be a long struggle. And that's assuming that the modern progressives don't do anything crazier than burn down a couple of Tesla dealerships.
Right.
It's
Right.
entirely plausible that they could get even spicier and start attempted assassinations. You could end up with the left behaving like the IRA if they pull their heads out of their asses and become marginally competent. Um,
Right.
Now the CIA and FBI will have a thing or two to say about that, but I could easily see them trying because they haven't been subject to nearly as much surveillance as the right.
Well, what's interesting is I know the political conversations I find interesting, but what I really find interesting is that the more cultural thing, and I don't understand. I don't understand the leftists. Okay, I don't, and this is me coming from. I guess you could have considered me a liberal for the majority of my life and most of my 20s. I just don't get the mindset of somebody going to burn some Teslas. I like these aren't serious people in a way to me. You know what I mean? Like,
Um, I mean, like I have pretty decent insight. I mean, it's not my opinions on them are very uncharitable, but I'm of the opinion that the majority of progressives are just folks who want to hurt people
that's
and who want an excuse to do it. Like
right.
it's no more complicated than that. They just get their rocks off hurting people.
That's exactly what I have to agree with you. I cannot say anything because you sit down and I try to think, my entire, my entire life I've always sat down and tried to think of, everybody's opinions. It's just it's how I like to approach things. I like to sit down and go, okay, why do you do this? Why are you doing this? What's your view? And you can do that for a lot of people. You can go, okay, I understand. Like I tell people, listen, if I was a teenager or a young adult in my 20s in, Russia at the turn of the 20th century and I was poor working in some factory, I'd probably be okay with the fucking revolution, okay? All right, because I don't want to be, scraping rust off some battleship getting killed by the Japanese while, my king is out there hanging out with Fabergé eggs and his wife is banging Rasputin, I'd be okay with the revolution, and I would in a lot of ways, right? But I just don't see how I can be upset at a car dealership selling cars because the dude is trying to cancel foreign spending for nonsense. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Well, more accurately, the left is at this point a mentally ill suicide cult.
Right. It's the only way to do it's
As
really
a
the only
political
way.
Yeah,
movement, and
yeah.
it's because there's a percentage of people that will always be zealots, and back in like the 1980s, they were the ones who caused the Satanic Panic, and back during the 1950s, that they were the ones that caused the Red Scare. And as long as you have a highly democratic society, which we do, um, as a monarchist, I don't think we should. But as long as you have a highly democratic society, you're going to get zealots that go and do stupid things. The reason this one is so much worse than the ones of the past is because, um, to put it simply, the zealotry of the 50s and 60s was focused on like American exceptionalism. And if you're not exceptional enough, you can't be an American. And the zealotry of the 80s was focused on Christianity. And what both of those have in common is that they have leadership hierarchies.
Right.
So for American exceptionalism, you have a political leadership hierarchy. For Christianity, you have an obvious uh, Christian and Catholic Orthodox hierarchy. And in both those cases, the leadership prevents their followers from getting too out of hand. But the problem with leftism is they don't have a hierarchy. They're anti-hierarchy, but they're dogmatically hyper-Puritan. And so
Right.
what you end up with is these bizarre outbursts of violence as they try to take on this social aspect of high status, by being the most pure of the extremist Puritans. So if you think about their psychology, it's less like they have an ideology, and it ends up behaving more like they're a schoolyard bully who wants everybody to be afraid of them.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
because they never developed, and most of them are millennials and Zoomers who never developed past the age of 10 anyway. And that's why most of them are losers in their personal lives. If you've ever seen a left-wing activist's personal life, it's usually a huge dumpster fire.
Right. They're
Um,
just complete just dredges of society ultimately,
yeah, the problem is that the left attained enough power in the 90s through the boomers and partially as a reactionary movement to the Satanic Panic. I mean, I remember when kids were wearing like pentagrams around in high school and saying "Hail Satan" just to screw with the fundies, which is
That
going
was
to be
that was
hilarious
funny. That was
when
funny, okay?
I guarantee you there's going to be kids in high school wearing around. I mean, there already are wearing around swastikas and saying "Hail Hitler" just to troll the lefties. Um, and a decent percentage, just like the left, are going to actually go for alternative ideologies, which again I fully understand. But again, there's a reason why I'm a monarchist. I think human cultures need more hierarchy than they have. Um, but uh, the result is that you have a group without leadership that has the mentality of a of a 10-year-old bully that never grew up and now wants to burn Teslas to the ground to get their rocks off because hurting innocent people makes them feel powerful. And that's
Yeah.
as complex as left-wing ideology gets.
It's a
They're not even communists anymore. They're just horrible, horrible people.
it's a mob of lone wolf angry people.
Yep.
Right.
That's
Right.
it. And it's there's no direction, there's no structure, like you said. It's just atomized, pissed off people, and they simply don't know any better.
Oh, they know better.
Do they?
They know that they're
They
moral
know
relativists. So
they know what
think
they're
that
doing
if
is
they,
wrong, but they don't care.
Yeah, no,
well, no, they think
absolutely.
that if they're all doing something, it's by definition right because they're moral relativists. And because
Right.
they cut out anybody who disagrees with them, all the people that they know are doing the same thing.
Right.
That sounds like they don't know any better to me. I mean, they
I-
just
I-
don't know.
I-
Like it.
I feel like that's giving them too much credit. I feel
Oh, that's
like
fair.
I feel like that is an excuse for their reprehensible behavior, and we should not be making excuses for them.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I guess when I say they don't know any better, I'm thinking of like the 10-year-old who's behaving so poorly. Like that's not going to save you a whooping.
But they're not
Like
10.
yeah.
They're
Well,
30.
all right, they're not 10, but I mean like emotionally, like when I say, hey, you don't know what you're doing, well, that's not saving you a whooping because there's only one way you're going to learn that
Well,
you're going to learn, boy. But anyway,
I did deeply enjoy the memes of like Donald Trump when he got elected, and it's like Daddy's back home and he's brought his belt.
Well,
and the belt is JD Vance. No, I'm just kidding.
It
No,
is.
I mean, hopefully, it's interesting because, once again, we are a cultural podcast, right? I think for anybody that's listening, and I don't know if you've read this Copernican, the greatest writer of all time, the greatest literary writer of all time, Dostoevsky, wrote a novel called Demons, right? And the novel Demons is basically about these people. It's about the left and the degenerate left and how they're evil. Have you guys either of you read this novel?
No, not yet.
It's on my reading list.
Okay, so if you read that novel, you're gonna start reading it and you're gonna go, shit, this motherfucker like was hanging out with leftists of today because they're identical to the characters in that novel. And just to give a kind of a quick summary of the novel, it's about this small unnamed town in 1860 Russia, and there's these there's this character named Stefan Trofimovich, right, Verkovensky, and he is like a professor, and he's basically like the liberal professor, and he hangs out with this older, wealthy, influential landowner named Varva, and she is like rich, and they have salons and stuff. And what they basically do is they're rich landowner class people that influence or they support their like degenerate young children who are all like revolutionary types, right? Mm-hmm. And there's this group of like basically LARPers, right? Like, revolutionary LARPers that kind of hang around this circle. But one of them, right, is this guy who's actually the son of, he's like the son of like the professor, right? His name is Pyotr Verkovensky, and he is a degenerate nihilist, right? He's basically like he espouses all these ideals and all these like freedom for the peasants and blah 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 or whatever, right? But really, he's just a fucking degenerate nihilist, right? He hates everything. Like he's a murderer basically, right?
Yeah, I mean the left is a suicide cult,
right? And he's a mutant, but he basically sets into motion this like account of where all the different characters end up, some of them are there because they just want to bang women, that's where they hang out in these salons. Others are like because they're just disillusioned, aristocrats, right? But this mutant of a man, right, this mutant like true believer but very nihilistic true believer, he kind of sets into motion like murders and rape and all kinds of a disaster, and the whole city, the whole town falls apart because of his basically evil, and the people that are the most guilty, the people that like Dostoevsky points the finger at the most, are the older people, the professor and the socialites and stuff, who encourage the insanity of these young people. And that's exactly what we've had in the United States, is we have a class of upper class Democrats or liberals, this is your Tesla drivers, right? Your Tesla
Yep.
drivers as
The
of
Tesla
last,
drivers.
yeah, from last year, who encourage the revolutionary fantasies of these degenerates, these mutants who, want to just really hurt people, and they look the other way because most of these professors in colleges around the country, they fetishized the violence of the 1960s, but they weren't there. They weren't there, and even if they were there, they probably wouldn't have done anything, right? They're just fucking, they just fantasize about it, right? But they
They
put these
regret they never jumped in.
right, they put these ideas out and they encourage this kind of stuff, and we see this at the universities with all the lockdowns and all the crazy stuff during COVID and the shout downs and and everything because it's their LARP, it's their fantasy, but they encourage these kids, these younger people who are legitimate fucking mutants, like they're just social outcasts and crazy people, and it causes a situation where they've lost control of that wing of their party. You know what I mean? And now you have this one wing burning the other one wing's car because, like I tell you, I don't know any good old boy MAGA dude driving around in a Tesla. You know?
Yeah. No. Well, there's a couple.
I'm sure there's a couple.
There's like I think Brandon
There's at
Herrera
least
has a
one.
Tesla.
Yeah.
Um, he's a YouTuber. He's a gun
Oh,
tuber, and he's a relatively well-known gun tuber who ran for the state Congress for the state of Texas. No, for the National Congress for the state of Texas.
oh, that's right.
In this last cycle. But yeah, he had a Tesla. He dressed
Yeah,
it up
yeah,
like a Halo Warthog.
yeah. Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. Yes, that's right.
But yeah, most of the people who own Teslas are either liberal or left wing. And Tesla becoming a right wing brand, I think is ridiculous. But
Right.
whatever, man. I kind of hope that the liberals who voted Democrat and who have now been doxxed as Tesla owners get to enjoy some of the fruits of their labor over the last couple of years on their doorstep.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the last notes on Dostoevsky's Demons I wanted to make was actually that there is murder that happens in the novel, and it's an ideological murder, but it's not of the opposition; it's of their own side because they always kill
Yeah.
their own side. You
Oh
know what I
yeah.
mean?
Have you
Analyze.
read so the book that I would recommend if you really want so I'm gonna read Demons. But the book that I read back in when was this 2020, 2021, that really gave me a lot of insight into leftist psychology was actually the three body problem.
That's the I can't pronounce the Chinese name, right? It's the Chinese sci-fi one.
Cixin Liu is the name of
Cixin
the
Liu.
author.
Okay.
Must be something
And
in the water. We were just listening to a podcast about that. We were planning on getting into that. My wife and I.
it's a brilliant I would say it's probably the best science fiction of the 21st century so far.
Wow.
And it stands up
Okay.
there with Isaac Asimov. Um,
Nice.
which
Okay.
is I've read Asimov. I love Asimov.
Oh yeah.
And Asimov sort of generated a bunch of the ideas that became later popular in science fiction. And I
Yeah.
think the three body problem is doing something similar. It's going to be generating a lot of ideas that will come up later in science fiction. I also think it's indirectly responsible for the COVID pandemic, but that's not here nor there.
Interesting.
So it's because the three body problem was very popular among the Chinese elite about 10, 12 years ago. And there's a specific bit in it where they're using a virus as a biological weapon in the second book. And I'm almost dead certain that COVID was an attempt to experiment to create something like that.
They're like,
that
that's
then
a great
accidentally leaked
idea.
out of their
Let's try
labs.
that.
Yeah. Now that being said, the three body problem, the beginning of the first book of the three body problem, the first chapter and a couple of other chapters in the first book take place during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. And the ability of these individuals, of these zealots, to rationalize their horrible behavior, and they will keep on doing it right up until they lose an arm. I don't mean that metaphorically, neither in the book nor real life. Even after they lost an arm in real life, after Kyle Rittenhouse disarmed that guy.
Right.
Disarmed.
He pointed a gun at him and got disarmed. I think it's completely justified. Anyway, So even after that, but they will justify the most atrocious behavior under the guise of communism or Marxism or whatever the thing of the day is. And modern leftism in the United States is at the point where either they're going to have to quietly shrink away in shame and accept that the arc of history of the post-war era is over, and that leftism is doomed to failure because I mean, at this rate, we're going to see if women still have the right to vote in 100 years. Let me put it that way, because leftism has done so much. Modern leftism and liberals have done so much damage to concepts such as egalitarianism and universalism. Um, so they're either going to slink away or they're going to try and engage in wider scale conflict because they're unwilling to accept the idea that they could lose.
Right, no, that makes sense. I agree
And
with
they will
you.
justify it right until they take a bullet because they're absolutely atrocious individuals. Anyway, I highly recommend Three Body Problem if you want to understand that
Yeah,
psychology.
so I am familiar with the book. I remember when it came out, and I remember when it came out in translation in the United States, and it won like the Hugo Award and all that stuff, and
Mhm.
it was a big deal. I think I stayed away from it mostly because it won a Hugo Award. I was like, if those guys like it, I hate it. So, you know what I mean?
I
Hey, the one time they got it
I'm
right.
amazed it won a Hugo Award considering some of the spicier stuff they have in books 2 and 3.
Right. Usually when I read anything that won a Hugo Award, I'm like, oh my God, this is such trash. I think I read one a few years ago, and I was just like, I am done. This is how did this even get published, let alone like win awards because it was so poorly. Like for science fiction, I was like, this is so
Yeah.
bad, you know?
I have a question. I have a question. And
But
I want to go back to something Copernican just said. Either they're going to slink away and just accept that they are irrelevant, or they're going to double down and
And start
seek
engaging
some kind
in
of, yeah. And,
wide scale violence.
yep. What does everything look like? What does it look like when either of those two paths are done? I'm asking because this has popped up on Substack and also just generally, but Konstantin von Hofmeister's book, Multipolarity, I cracked it open right before the podcast today. And I know that Librarian of Solano, friend of the podcast, has written a interesting review of it. I haven't read his review yet. But this idea of multipolarity, what the world's going to look like in the next 100 years, let's kick it out there. All right. It's 2125. We're all dead and gone, hopefully. Where does this all play out? What do you guys think? What's it look
Well,
like when it's all done?
I think that either way, the concept of liberalism and egalitarianism is going to have a black mark on its name in the same way that, like, maybe not Nazism does now, but definitely the way communism did in like the
Agree.
1970s.
Strong agree. Absolutely.
Um, and like one way or another, it's going to have a black mark on its name. Nobody's going to want to identify with quote unquote progressive values, even if they believe in progressive values. They're going to have to come up with another name for it.
Right.
The response to it will depend on how they went out. If they In both cases, I suspect in the United States, you're going to see a radical cultural divergence from Europe. I think the United States will, in 100 years, 2125, will probably claim a separate ethnic group from Europeans. Or it will be understood that they are. They'll be in the process of defining themselves as a separate ethnic group. Um, I suspect that the United States will, at that point, be more imperial. I suspect most of the world will be poorer. And because liberalism will have put such a black mark on its name, there will be no opposing force within the United States from a moral perspective, or few opposing forces. It'll be more like Christian abolitionist kind of things that will oppose American economic imperialism. We're going to be going through a resource crunch. So a lot of people do social or they do resources. They don't do both. I do both. Um, and the resource crunch is going to exacerbate tensions between nations. The United
Yeah.
States will have the largest and most powerful military, and we will be using it, or second largest, most powerful, probably still the largest and most powerful, and we will be using it to bully various smaller countries around the world into giving us their natural resources one way or another. To quote Donald Trump in the what is it, the House address, the what is it, where he speaks to everybody, is State of the Union.
State of the
To
Union, yeah.
quote Donald Trump in the State of the Union, Greenland is important for national security and it's important for global security. And I think it's important that we have it, and we're going to have it, I think, one way or another. I think that you'll get more rhetoric like that out of the United States, and it won't be bluster. I think the United States will probably either seize territory or seize economic rights to valuable mineral and petroleum resources around the world, because we can, and because there are limits to the amount of mineral and petroleum resources that are available. We're going
to scramble for what we can.
Well, so what's going to happen is,
yeah,
there's only, the problem is our economic model requires infinite economic growth. There's the problem.
right. Yes.
And that was a great economic model until we started running into hard limits. Now we aren't limited.
This is a great model until we started running out of things.
Yeah. Now we aren't limited by the amount of copper in the ground, for example. There's still more than enough copper to continue growing the global economy for like another 50, 100 years. But we are limited by the speed that we can pull it out of the ground.
Right.
So the economic growth we have cannot continue exponentially increasing forever globally.
Right.
And the United States will have fully given up on classically liberal ideal or modern liberal ideals like global egalitarianism and uplifting the third world, because that's not possible. You can't have everyone live this kind of lifestyle. Instead, we will take on an imperial perspective, and in so doing, and almost a feudal perspective, because we're also going to have 2 or 3 separate classes in the United States. We're going to have a landowner class, a rentier class, and I propose that we're going to have a non-citizen, non-voting, permanent resident worker class.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But the first thing
slaves.
we'll do is, yeah, basically. But the first thing we'll do is we'll pull birthright citizenship, and that'll create this new class separation. In like the next 30 years. And so there will be no moral compunctions from the United States aristocracy or the United States citizenry about seizing resources from weaker neighbors, because either the global economy has to grow forever, and that can't happen, or the global economy has to shrink, right? Because it can't remain stable, and there's a lot of complicated reasons why. But the global economy can't grow forever, and it can't, and nobody in the United States wants the national economy to shrink. So what we can do is make the global economy shrink faster by taking their resources and grow the national economy at its expense.
Right.
Now, so for that to happen, we would need to have a very significant cultural change in self-perception and the perspective of the people, because one of the problems,
first step in that is going to be birthright citizenship.
I agree with you on that one, right? That would be probably if Trump is able to remove that, and we are able to put that on the on the ash heap of history of bad ideas, that would be a significant cultural change that will echo through history.
I think
it would be a radical cultural change, and here's why. It's because it would effectively create an American legal identity that is separate from our traditional ethnic identities. The example I've given is if you have a mostly Hispanic town on the southern border somewhere in Texas, right? And you got all the kids playing together and the parents talking to each other, and some of them are legal and some of them aren't. They work their jobs and they go home and they have dinner. And then birthright citizenship gets revoked. Now, the kids on the west side of the street, they're citizens. They are a different legal class from those that are there illegally, and always will be. It has dramatically changed the cultural ethos of the United States to drop birthright citizenship, and I don't think that alone will be enough, but it will be a start down toward the eventual imperial position I expect the United States to be in.
Right,
yeah.
and
sorry to cut you off there, Pisto.
No, it's fine. It strikes me, and I want to push back slightly. not that birthright citizenship was a bad idea, but I think it was an idea that made sense at the time, simply because everyone in this side of the on this side of the world in the Western Hemisphere were former colonies. So where do we get our people from if we don't just say, "Oh, you're here, congratulations, you're part of our country now"? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Russians and people in the old world, like for example, I use Russia. Like everybody knows what a Russian is. Like a Russian is very clear ethnic and cultural identity. And I think part of the imperial process, maybe this is more of a question, sort of a thought, but part of the imperial process is going to be defining what an American is and what an American is not
Yeah. And I
in a way
think,
that we haven't done before.
Right.
yeah, I think that's going
Okay.
to happen. And I
All
think it's
right.
going to, like, I get where a number of the American white nationalists are coming from, but I think that that's not going to be where it goes. I think
I
that
don't think so either.
the
No.
restructuring of the United States will create a new, first legal and then ethnic identity for Americans that will be seen as exceptional and will be seen as separate from the rest of the world, and will also be divided into a similar, landed nobility, unlanded serf, or unlanded renter type of class system. And then you're going to have eventually we're going to have a labor shortage because we're not going to have birthright citizenship. And so the labor shortage is going to induce the United States government to create a permanent resident worker class. And because they're a separate legal class and they're not allowed to vote, most American citizens will be okay with that. In that creation of a structured and tiered society, which again is very similar to the Roman structured and tiered society towards the
Right.
mid-empire, um, is going to itself create this really different sense of national identity from what we have now. We won't be the shining city on the hill. We're going to be like the holder of the legions. We're the United States will be the commander of the carrier groups across the oceans.
Right. But and then, to bring back to actually that topic, to the military, right? Now, the big problem right now is that nobody wants to join the military. All right. Nobody
Well,
wants to
that's
join the
turned
military.
around. So that's partially turned around, but go ahead.
Well, so um, nobody, they need to pay people more, right? If people are going to go and be on overseas adventures, they're going to need to have some sort of, actual benefit to it, and there just isn't for your average person that becomes an enlisted member in the military. They just don't see it because it's either ideological, like in the case of post 9/11, where everybody joined the military because they wanted to fight the terrorists for freedom or whatever. If 9/11 happened today, you would not have that level of recruitment, and where the recruiters have to fight people off from joining. And it's just, you'd have to sell the people of the United States on any type of offensive expeditionary adventuring for resources before you're able to do that,
All right. So there's uh two responses I have to that. One is under the current paradigm, that's true. So first let's go over military recruitment. Military recruitment numbers have improved dramatically since January.
They're fake.
They are partially fake.
They're fake, and I tell you, from working,
Yes.
for being in the military for 20 years, and I currently live outside of Paris Island, California, where they do the MCRD boot camp, and I worked there before, right? What happens is basically the recruiters put tons of people in, and that's the number that gets sent, right? When they arrive at Paris Island, 50% of those people are like broken or insane, or and then it gets sent home. But the numbers that get reported are the initial recruiting station numbers,
Yep.
right?
So
So they're just fake.
I agree with you, but those numbers are partially fake. The military's done a number of tricks. One of them is they said, "Oh, we met our recruitment goal for this year." Yeah, that's because you cut your recruitment goal in half.
Right.
Another thing that they've done is they've permitted the recruitment of truly incompetent people because they couldn't get anyone else, and so they filled up the remainder of the half with those. Now, with that said, though, I do anticipate that so young men like empire is a good way to put it. Young men are willing to fight for empire.
Right.
And I think that the United States military system right now is a gigantic honking mess. But if you go out a few hundred years, the cultural paradigm we'll have created by then will go one of two ways. I suspect first it will go in the direction of more imperial soldier. So that would be our current military system. Um, but you're right, that's going to get expensive pretty quick. And once we've got our sort of backbone military system with its shit back together, a lot of smaller excursions are going to end up being run by PMCs.
Right. I believe that. I believe that I can see a corporate run, private military doing resource extraction for corporations,
Mhm.
with the blessing of the US government in the same way, letters of marque were given to pirates back in, the 17th, 18th centuries. No,
I
because,
feel like we're getting to our obligatory cyberpunk reference.
well, no, we are
I want a
But
letter of
aren't we?
marque for
Aren't we? Aren't we?
we are
I,
getting to
I
cyberpunk.
I want a letter of marque for Canadians.
Right. That
I
Yeah.
want to go and I want to find beautiful Canadian girls and bring them back to the United States and sell them like a machine gun out of the back of a questionable pickup truck and behind a gas
I,
station.
the, the,
out of the
the
back of a car built in the 80s.
Yeah.
the
That's funny.
problem with the US military recruiting, right, is that forever, for the last, 50, 60 years, the left has been against the US military. And in the last 5 or 6 years, the right has joined the left in being against the military. And a general like viewpoint of the military is that it's not somewhere where you want to go. And the pay sucks and you get treated like shit and you're never going to get promoted. And if you do go somewhere
Especially
cool,
if you're a white guy.
absolutely, right? That's the perception, whether it's true or not, right? I'm not going to comment on that, but whether it's true or not, right? That is the perception. And a lot of the people of my generation in the military, the global war on terror crowd, feels completely, abused and abandoned and unhappy with the way things have, and turned out after 20 years of that whole GWAT thing. And you're not selling it, right? Because there's nothing to fight for, whether it's, basically like cultural, philosophical ideals or money, right? Ultimately, to quote my favorite mercenaries, no silver, no Swiss, right? And that's where we're at right now, where your average Starbucks employee gets paid better than a fucking, E4, Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps, you know?
Fair.
And that,
And to
that,
be fair,
that
the average Starbucks. So this is a problem a lot of public institutions are having, actually. It's not just the military.
right.
Um, there are universities, I'm not going to name names, but I know well enough about their internal financials. Let me put it that way. They will hire like people with bachelor's degrees or in the process of getting their bachelor's degrees and years of experience in the lab to be laboratory assistants. And the university has a horrible time keeping them because the university pays less than fucking Walmart or McDonald's.
Right. Right. Like, I mean,
But hey, guys, sorry, I want to interrupt real quick. I kind of have I have another question. And while you were talking, Alex, I had this vision unfurl in my mind. I went to a wedding over the weekend for a good friend of mine, and I'm down. I don't know if you've heard Copernican, if you've listened to any other podcasts, but I'm basically in South Florida, Southwest Florida. I live at what would be would have been like the extreme northern edge of the Everglades, former lands of the Seminole tribe, stuff like that. You know what I mean? So you get an idea where I am. I'm hanging out with a bunch of war on terror vets. My best friend is a war on terror vet,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a mix of men, either Florida cracker or Latino,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody's in construction. I'm in, I'm a high school teacher, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking at all these guys, and we all have various families, but I would say that every one of us is putting together the best we can out of the wreckage of the last 30 years. And some of it's self-inflicted, some of it's not. Just, it's
I
we're the
think that's the
cultural.
nature of being in your 30s in this day and
Yeah,
age.
yeah, you're probably right. But for whatever reason, I mean, we've created, my best friend especially he's created a home for himself. Like he's built quite a bit out of the detritus of his situation, And I'm sitting there looking at all these guys, and I just see a thing. I see a thing, I see community. And in light of everything that we're talking about, what should we be doing? What should me and these guys, what should we do with ourselves? I imagine it's, get married, have kids, hang out, do the things that we're doing. But is there a bigger
Well,
picture than that? Because like
I
you
think
said,
so.
young men will fight for empire because it's freaking cool.
Yeah, because it's
You
awesome.
know?
That's why.
Yeah, fucking let's go.
I really
Anyway.
want a future where you've got like people with big American legionnaires with huge Christian crosses on their chest carrier or whatever. Just going to, I think that'd be great. Anyway,
Yeah.
my recommendation, and I've written about this a lot, is the structural formation of intentional communities. Now, a lot
Yeah.
of people don't have a couple $1,000,000 to throw around, but if you can find somebody who does and is interested in
Hmm.
this sort of thing, that would be a good direction to
Funny
go.
you should mention it. Anyway, I am not that man for the record, but yes.
Yeah.
Neither am I.
Let me just clarify that for a second.
The
But sorry,
minimum,
go ahead.
I estimated the minimum cost for booting one up, and it floats around $1,000,000 right now. And next year it'll be that plus 5%. But uh, the idea is that one of the big problems we have in our modern society is total nucleation, which is to say all the bad parts of having a nuclear family. Kids don't get to see grandma, grandpa don't get to see the kids. When they get kicked out of the house, they have nowhere to go. They have no home base. And so they immediately need to start working and put their nose to the grindstone and don't have the time to really get out there and try to find what they're good at and get good at it. And we have a state-sponsored apparatus through the university system for both indoctrination and employment programming. And there's a lot of people rebelling against it, but nobody has a really good way to do it. And I'm not the person to figure out a great way to rebel against the university system, although there's somebody I've talked to about that in terms of the construction of alternative academies. But the thing that I would recommend is if you can get a group of 3 to 5 families in close proximity to each other with the intention of staying in close proximity and with housing sufficient to be multi-generational, you can ensure that your kids will be a part of the landowner class rather than the rentier class.
That's entirely possible here. It's also interesting you said alternative academies because something that I did, I met a guy, I met a new friend of mine, and then I was talking to the other guys, and they're all in construction. They're planning on working together at some point. And I went, guys, listen, keep me in the back of your mind because I might have a bunch of 18, 17-year-old fellows who they don't know what they want to do with their life. Well, maybe you can help them figure that out and be useful. And plus, maybe they'll stick around.
Right. That's what
so,
you have to do. Hey guys, excuse me for
so
1 minute.
No,
I gotta go use the restroom real fast. So guys, keep talking. Okay, I'll be back in like a minute. All right?
Uh-oh. Flying solo with Fisto. All right, I'll get
Dude,
you.
I drank like 3 cups of coffee just now. So
old man break. Yeah, I'll need one when you get back. Anyway, so yeah, it looks like my instinct was right, maybe. Now that you've explained what I intuited. But anyway, please go on.
Kids need, so the next generation needs 2 things. First of all, is they're not going to be able to buy their own house, right? If you have a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old, you're like, well, you can work hard all your life, but unless I own a bunch of property, you're never going to be able to own anything.
Right.
And so one of the goals is if you can't own a bunch of property, and if you can't own any property, especially, the goal would be to get together with other people and form a limited liability corporation that you can all own voting shares in and use that to buy a chunk of property. And then you would have a system relatively similar to the Amish system.
Nice. Okay. The Amish win again.
Yeah. Well, they're pretty good at this. They've been doing it successfully for 150 years. But the idea is once you have established a semi-communal, I would say the way I would recommend organizing it, and I specified it in my article, and I would recommend readers to go listen to it in terms of the article's name is A Blueprint for Intentional Communities, I believe.
Okay.
Is that
neo-monarchy, a blueprint for liberty? That one?
Nope, that's a monarchy article. If you go back a little bit,
I'll find it. I just want to make sure we grab a link. So
a blueprint for
independent enclave communities. Hey, there we go. All right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say take a look at that. You can establish these as communal systems, but the problem with establishing it as a communal system and is it's going to be very difficult to get wealthy people who are willing to put $200,000 in.
Yeah.
The solution that I have to it is you have one primary investor who purchases it under the LLC and sells shares in it to other people on the cheap. Because it's invitation only, you sell a share in it for like $5,000 and that person gets a quarter acre to put their house on and do whatever they want with, right?
Mm.
The person who bought it, effectively, this is a transition to a feudal system because the person who bought it gets to lead the community. And then when they die or retire, their kid gets to lead the community. So that's the benefit he gets from from that big initial investment.
Right.
The benefit you get, and particularly your kids get, is they can own property effectively. They own property as not as a rentier, but as a partial owner of the entire LLC community. So the way I would propose this is if you can get a group of people to all do it together, that's great. But I understand the problems with doing that. Because somebody's at some point going to want to leave or has a family member that has to move in, or there's going to be some mess and they're going to say, hey, you have to buy me out. And you guys are going to say, well, we don't have 200 grand to buy you out with. we can't do it.
Right.
Whereas if their initial investment is $5,000, they can drop it. Like it's not comfortable to just say, well, that's a $5,000 loss, but it's not something you're going to have to rebuild your life from.
Right, exactly. It sucks, but it's not going to destroy the thing.
And so the way I would pose this as an elevator pitch is I would say, if you can find somebody willing to put the big money in to get it kicked off, right? And you can find people who are going to follow up, buy the shares that are a quarter acre of land, along with having a weighted vote in the community, and put their own place on it, trailer, build a house, do whatever. They can drop it with significantly less loss than they would have if they actually had a full buy-in. And B, they effectively take on the role of knight.
Right.
So
yeah,
the guy in charge gets to be the baron or the count, so to speak, from a feudal perspective. The other people who buy in get to be the knights. And if everybody has kids, because that's one of the requirements, they all have to be couples, because you can't have a bunch of dudes living in one place without causing problems.
Right.
They all have to come in as couples, and they all have to intend to have kids. If all of them have kids, that means your kids and your grandkids get to grow up with this stability.
Right.
That they have a place they can always go back to because they're going to inherit your share. And B, they grow up with all the other kids. So whereas we have high schools and the cliques that form in those, which tend to be quite unhealthy, especially in larger cities, it's a fucking disaster. And social media as a proxy for actual friendships, the kids in this community will start off with this very close familial bond with the kids of other families. And that will allow not you, but it'll allow the kids to actually behave as knights.
Right.
So you're basically talking about, forming a charter company in a way, right? I missed it.
Yeah.
I got an article that goes through it in detail, but yeah,
I dropped a link in there for you.
Yeah,
Okay.
you form an
Alex.
LLC, and then you form an LLC. Let's say you have $1 million you want to dedicate to this project, which not a lot of people do, but if you can find somebody who does, or if you can find like two people who do combined, or if you can get a big enough loan, you get $1 million, you dedicate it to this project, and you buy a chunk of land, and then you sell shares in the land to other people on an invite-only basis,
Right.
which allows the other people to have voting rights in the company, but allows the initial investor to retain a significant minority of the shares, is what I said would probably be safest, like 45% of the shares stay with the initial investor. So the initial investor, this effectively creates a feudal structure where the initial investor becomes the baron, and the other people who buy in become the families of the knights who work for the baron.
Right.
Kind of reminds me of like an independent ship. You've got the captain, and then you've got the crew.
Well, yeah,
And the
I
crew
was
has
I
their
was
equal
thinking like
shares.
one of the early colonies in the United States, like the Virginia colonies and stuff,
Mhm.
with investors and people buying into the overall project.
And what that does is it creates an environment where your kids have a home base they can always go back to. They're going to inherit your shares, and they get to grow up with a bunch of other very like-minded families and kids, which will dramatically improve their socialization. And it will allow them, because of the bonds that they'll have established, basically lifetime bonds they'll have established when very young, they will be able to behave. They'll actually, in a generation, behave as the knights of
Right.
this barony.
And I think
And
this is a fantastically well thought out idea. The main problem will be that is you'd have to have the legal framework to for it to be allowed, because as soon as anybody that's like based minded, for example, tries to do something like this, you're gonna have the mutants attack through legal
Yeah.
means. You know what I mean?
um, well, all right. So I've
Guys,
worked on
guys,
that part too.
sorry, real quick, old man break. Be right back.
Okay.
Okay, I've worked on that part too. So you form this as the same type of LLC, specifically as the same type of LLC used by large landowners and large farms in the area,
Okay.
because anything that they do to legislate against you, they'll have to do to legislate against those too. And those people have a shitload of lobbyists.
Right, like how you'd basically form it or own the land in the same way Disneyland owns chunks of Orlando, Florida.
Uh, if possible, yes. I'm not quite sure how that
Right.
legal structure works. You'd probably have to go a little bit lighter than that. But look at like large landowners who own massive apartment complexes.
Right.
Look at what type of company they have put together. My proposal was to do it in a rural area, and that would mean farmland, which means A1 zoning, which gets a little bit complicated, but not that complicated. Um, and you can set it up as a nonprofit, also a 501c3, which will allow you to A, take donations that are tax write-offs, which will be fun. And B, it allows you to, as long as you're acting on behalf of the 501c3, it allows you to do a couple of other clever things. The article goes into it in detail, but the recommendation was to like have a 501c3 and then two LLCs that then circulate money between them, creating taxable transactions at every go, which turns everything into an above board company.
Right. Right. Well, that's actually a very interesting idea. Um, and that's something that, like, I hope, I mean, that would be an ideal situation if we could go to a habitable planet, like terraform Mars, and that would work
Right.
amazing. That's the model for the future, right? Um,
Mhm.
the I think the hardest thing is that you'd have to have ideologically similar people, or at least on the same page, which you would if they were buying in, right? And you'd have to have a,
Yep.
a good location. And the what I've noticed, the main problem a lot of times is that the kind of people that have the money to do this type of stuff are they don't want to live in a place where they can do this. They want to live in Los Angeles, New York, the Hamptons, the golf courses of South Carolina and Florida, where um, you
You
know,
haven't met a lot of farmers in Nebraska.
right, right. But unfortunately, one of the debates on the base side or the right side, right, is the city versus the rural versus city divide, and the reality of it, in my opinion, is that culture and a nation is really created in the cities, not in the rural areas. I mean, that's where our universities are. That's where our culture are. That's where, so we'd have to have a shift from the metropolitan megacities to a more rural mindset. And that would have to be first a cultural shift before that becomes like an acceptable thing for people that want to make
Well,
a difference too.
there's two responses I have to this. One of them is that this system or a variant of it will work equally well in a large city. That's how the Hasidic Jews do it in New York.
Right,
In a large city, what you do is you don't buy a chunk of land, you buy a building.
right,
And then you effectively, and you saw like little Tokyo, Chinatown, all of these places did it effectively as ethnic enclaves. And you create this as a pseudo ethnic enclave, an ideological enclave. Um, and once you've gotten established, it's actually pretty easy to maintain this. In an urban environment, I would specifically suggest centering it around or near a church, that everybody will agree to have as their church, because churches are some of the best last standing cultural centers that we kind of have in the United States, and they're booming right now. There's a whole bunch of young people going back to church. Um, Kids everywhere in some churches.
Right. I've seen it
Um,
with my own eyes.
it's great. So that's what I would recommend if you want to do it in an urban area. If you want to do it in a rural area, having a church nearby would be nice, but it's not critical. Because the community is going to be a little bit better insulated in a rural area. My argument is that it doesn't matter which one you prefer. You should be able to find people for both. Some people prefer rural environments. Some people prefer urban environments. The fact that urban areas are turning into gigantic population sinks, is going to have some odd knock-on effects. I think rural areas are going to become much more valuable, not now, but for the next generation. And that'll be because of the population collapse that happens in urban areas, which will also cause dramatic economic stagnation, while rural areas will have enough space effectively to boot up new small industries utilizing high technology in ways that urban areas are just too priced out to do and too
Right.
overregulated.
You know, and I agree with you. You know, like I said, I grew up in a very um, metropolitan area of Los Angeles, and I recently moved in the last few years to South Carolina, outside of Savannah, which is a small town. I mean, compared to
I know
California.
Savannah.
Savannah's a small town. You know
I
what I
read a
mean?
book about Savannah.
I like Savannah a lot, right? But I live out in, across the river in the South Carolina side, and it's booming, right? It's growing faster than the county and city and state like authorities can maintain, right? Our roads are not even adequate for the population we've had grown in the last few years. I do like the idea, and you know what? That's kind of why I love doing this podcast is because like I like this idea a lot. I like the idea of the urban version of what you're talking about, or
Yeah, you
really,
can do it in an urban version.
really what I mean by urban, I mean the suburban version of what's going on. That's I think is more realistic.
Mhm.
You look at you look in my area right now, or even in Southern California, and you have tons of these gated type communities, which are gated card members only to come in, and a lot of them have their own little. My dog is like going crazy, but they have their own little like they have their own supermarkets and they have
Mhm.
Starbucks and hair salons and barbers and a bunch of different like little, you know, restaurants that just really
But they
belong
don't
to the
actually have
community.
the reason you do it. They don't have very few of them have
Right,
well-structured local communities, which is
right,
why you're
and
supposed to do it in the first place.
that's what's missing. What's missing is the actual purpose, right? The actual, their purpose is to get away from other people. That's kind
Yeah.
of like their impetus, right? Um, And that's really what the exurbs are really all about is to get away from other people, to get away from the city, but still be close enough to be able to, work and that kind of stuff. But I do think that the digital revolution is going to liberate people from, having
Mhm.
to live in urban centers, which to me, like for example, for all my dislike of the internet as a whole, I mean, I do love the internet because I'm talking to you over the internet right now, right? I'm talking to
It is how
Fisto.
we met. Yeah.
Right, two states away, and one
Oh
of the
yeah.
one of the best things about it really is banking, right? And that's one that never gets mentioned is the fact that we can easily bank over the internet and be able to get our paychecks and our transfers and stuff instantly is something that makes life very much livable in rural areas now when you did not have that ability to move funds around and receive funds and make money um, using the old snail mail system. And that allows us to do e-commerce and be able to, somebody can run all kinds of stuff from a middle of nowhere place as long as you have an internet service, which allows a lot more freedom than, 20, 30 years ago when you had to rely on mail orders and that type of stuff. And so I think it will open up the world like that for people, and now you just have to give them a reason. And um, I find that very fascinating.
Well,
Sorry, sorry about my
uh,
dogs, guys.
no, you're good. I was gonna say the only reason why I'm invested in doing this in the United States at all, as opposed to another country or going to like Taiwan or Japan or something to do this, because housing's cheap in Japan. Um, the only reason I'm heavily invested in trying to do this in the United States is because I really like firearms.
Yeah.
Um, And if it
Right.
wasn't for that, I would be entirely willing to dip out of this country at this point. But I also really like the idea of my kids being U.S. citizens of the next big imperial power. So
Right.
so
Yeah.
I I was really kind of up in the air with this last election. I was seriously considering abandoning my rifle, my rifle, and going to another country if things didn't pan out well. But they appear to have panned out pretty well. And given that it appears we're going through an imperial transition, I think if I can get my kids, um, I think if I can get kids, a good stepping stone into what will probably be so I'm going to be working for a long time, but that's life.
Right.
Into what will probably be the next big empire, and ideally to be a landowning member of the class of the next big empire, they're going to be much better positioned than they would be otherwise.
Well,
So,
that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
That is
yep.
the fundamental conservative or right wing goal is to be able to pass down what we have to our children and on and on and on, right? Whether it's our traditions, like you
Mhm.
wrote about in your last post from 2 days ago,
Yep.
or our financial, our wealth, right? Our wealth traditions, our culture needs to be passed down, and we need to if we're going to support a government, it needs to be a government that, or in a system that makes doing that easy, or it makes doing that viable. And that's really
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
only purpose of government when it comes
Well,
to.
The only
that's why I'm looking at the intentional community model, because I think that they're much likely to have stability if I can pass down a barony to my kids
Right.
instead of a heavily taxed piece of quote unquote private
Right.
housing.
Well, let's talk about you though, real fast, right? Because we failed to introduce you, like we failed to introduce all our guests, right?
this
You're
is a
so.
feature of
This
the
is a feature because
award-winning Black
oh
Ibis
yeah,
Social Club.
because we are a social club. People come in, have
Yeah, and we
conversations
just
with
start
us, and
talking.
we have
I don't know why people listening to this here. You're just eavesdroppers. It's freaking
right,
creepy.
right, and I love all the listeners. By the way, you guys are amazing. And the private messages you guys send me, saying that like you really enjoyed the show and all this stuff. It really makes my life. It brings happiness to my life because when I'm coming back, almost nearly getting arrested at the DNV, and I see a message from a listener saying, "Hey, you know, keeping me sane. You guys are great." It really keeps me from going on that, taxi driver rampage that I'm borderline about to do every day. Um,
Agreed, agreed. But fuck all of you just in case.
right,
That's important.
but Copernican, I'm looking at your bio on Substack. You write tons of art pieces on there, and they're all fantastic. And one thing that popped out is that you have an MS in anthropology. Now that's an interesting choice because anthropology is usually a fucking lefty thing, right? How did that tell us about that?
That's not actually true. I
Oh,
put it
okay,
in there to mess with
okay,
people.
Even
okay.
better,
Because I
even
was looking,
better.
because talking to you, I'm like,
Fantastic.
I'm thinking, how did this motherfucker sit down through a master's in anthropology? Because I think anthropology is a fascinating subject, right? And
Anthropology is amazing. Yeah,
in
absolutely.
college,
Mhm.
I took both cultural anthropology and physical anthropology, right? But they are dumb. It is a field that is just diseased with
Oh, it's
leftyism, right?
So
rough.
yeah. So what's the background behind the joke? Because everything we say is true, especially the lies.
Right.
All right. So the background. So I do have an MS, but it's in biotech,
Okay.
actually.
Okay.
Um, and I put it in there. I think it was a joke that the delinquent academic made when I was talking to him, because he actually is in like sociology or anthropology, which is amazing. I think he's getting his PhD. And the other reason I put it in is because I can't because finding a job is really hard right now, especially with federal funds getting cut off to academics. And so I've actually been considering going to get a PhD or an MS in anthropology just to see what would happen.
Um,
Because it would be fascinating to get in there and rile up some anthro department somewhere.
I
Because I'm
mean,
sure they'd get riled up.
I took a sociology course at Cal State University, Long Beach, and I remember the sociology teacher walking in, and the whole course was about women in prison and how they're actually innocent and they should have killed their husbands, and it's not that they're a right to do so. And I remember just wanting to just slam my face into my pencil on the desk every single time I went in, and I just gave up. I quit. I was like, I'm done with this. I can't do this.
Uh,
Like, but I actually find anthropology to be a very fascinating subject. I mean, one of my favorite academics and writers, Mircea Eliade, is
mhm,
technically technically an anthropologist. He
mhm,
studied religion, but he studied shamanism and all the different
mhm.
ancient religions and practices of tribal people. So I find the topic interesting. I also find physical anthropology and that, but it is a very highly politicized field,
Oh yeah.
especially when you get into physical anthropology about human ancestors, and you walk landmines of pissing off the religious people, but you also landmine pissing off the super liberal nature versus nurture kind of guys, and it's a fascinating explosive landmine of a field that is completely chained down by
Actually,
ideological ideas on all
yeah,
sides.
this kind of dovetails. I think I remember now. So the reason I really put that in is there was a thread on Twitter a while back on X, um, where somebody was complaining about the quality of students in their philosophy department. There was a professor complaining about a lot of the students in philosophy these days, they aren't really interested in reading books anymore, and they're spending a lot of time using AI systems and whatnot. And somebody responded to that, and it's like, well, yeah, it's because you kicked out all the philosophers. Like the kids out there reading Nietzsche and Spengler and Dostoevsky as an example. Um, those are the guys that should be in your department. You just won't let them in
Right,
because they're better educated than the students you have there. They just don't get your stupid credential.
right.
And
It's absolutely true.
it is true. The best and the brightest in terms of like anthro, philosophy, sociology are not welcome in the university system.
Right. Find me a class in philosophy and undergrad that mentions Nick Land. You know what I mean? Like I mean, if I were to go into, a philosophy class, I'd want to talk about Nick Land and, just the stuff we talk about on the internet, on
Uh-huh.
podcasts and stuff.
Yeah.
But I actually had a great kind of not a great conversation, a great example of this conversation. One of my real close friends, he was a guest on one of the early podcasts. His name is Chris, and
Mhm.
he studied philosophy in college, and he studied it all the way through, and he basically, it was an uphill fight the whole time for him, with his views and his stuff, and it just, I God bless him. I don't know how he did it. And the stuff he told me about some of his professors is just insane. Um, but you know, I I was at a party, and it was a party with a bunch of golf boomers, golf boomers and in polo shirts, basically the White Lotus crowd. And there was a guy there. He was a younger guy, probably closer to my age, younger than me, because he just got married. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I got a degree in philosophy, blah blah blah." So I got excited, I was like, "Oh cool, like I'm gonna sit down and smoke a cigarette and talk to this guy about, Nick Land or something, Mark Fisher maybe or something, right?"
You
And
light up, and the guy probably just lost his
he
mind
had
on
no
you.
he had no fucking idea what I was talking about.
Oh no.
His entire bachelor's in philosophy was basically ancient Greece, the Greek philosophers.
Really, that was it?
He couldn't even talk about, middle age, like Christian philosophers like Aquinas or anything like that. He had
Yeah,
no freaking,
Aquinas is an interesting character.
yeah,
Anyway,
That's
sorry, go
rough,
ahead.
man. Look, you got a philosophy department and you're getting a bunch of morons that use AI. Just do the honorable thing and close up shop.
Yeah, close the department.
Just purge it, salt the fields, destroy Carthage, and just walk away. Like
yeah.
at that point, you don't have a philosophy department.
The guy
If you
couldn't hang,
don't, yeah, if you don't attract philosophers, you're not a fucking philosopher.
the guy couldn't hang with conversations about Heidegger or, Schopenhauer,
Oh,
any of like the stuff that I think is really entry level for the 21st century, right?
Mhm.
yeah,
Um, and I'm not even deep into philosophy beyond like reading,
yeah, yeah,
some of
yeah,
the
yeah.
key texts, like I've read some Schopenhauer, I've read I've read some Heidegger, and mostly from my friend Chris handing me stuff. I've read some contemporary stuff. I've read, I've read some Land, and I've listened to kind of like opinions
But
on land
you
and stuff.
gotta you gotta read the most famous philosopher from the sovereign state of Montana at some point,
Which one is that?
Kaczynski.
Oh yeah, no, I've read that one. Right.
I
Everyone's
read
read
that
that
over the
one. I love
summer.
that.
I read that over
Yeah.
the summer.
That was a good one. I really
I'm
like that
trying to
one,
get it. I'm
actually.
trying to get it officially added to my library at school. It's hilarious because the copy I have doesn't have an IBSN number or like anything, and I just sent it in. I'm like, fuck it. Just tell me no. I might throw it in there anyway because you could just do things now.
Right.
That's
I
true. You
mean,
can just do things now.
Yeah,
you're gonna put industrial society and its future on your next syllabus, right?
absolutely.
You know,
Yeah,
Do
it
it.
like I'm creating it's developing into a very eclectic collection. I'm gonna have Younger up there. I'm gonna have
Ooh,
Kaczynski
nice.
up there, Watterson,
right.
all kinds of good stuff because people are gonna be like, "What is this shit?" I'm gonna be like,
You
"Find
know,
out, crack it open, take a look. What's the
I
worst that could happen?"
I feel like I feel like philosophy is taught really weird in college. And I ended up taking a philosophy course once I was interested. It was like an entry to philosophy, but really it was the history of philosophy because you really can't really engage with a lot of those old ideas in the same way. I wish
Yeah,
that philosophy would focus a lot more on contemporary and kind of bounce back and forth and kind of explain where these guys got their ideas and how it built upon the older stuff. But somebody you'd get more students into philosophy if you let them read like Mark Fisher, for example, as opposed to just focusing on Plato and Aristotle
yeah.
and the old stuff.
Read the really fucked up shit. That's what people gets people
Well,
going. They're like, "Oh, this is cool."
I
Yeah.
think Francis Yaki would probably be pretty attractive to kids these days.
Oh,
It's
remind me,
it's
what did he write?
I
What did he
believe
write?
that he wrote. Let me double check. I want to make sure I'm not talking out my butt.
That's okay. We talk out of our butt here on the Black Ibis Social Club
Um,
podcast.
And the name sounds familiar, and I've probably read his stuff.
let's see. Oh, come on. Wow.
Well, while you're looking that
He
up,
wrote
oh,
some
sorry,
of the
go ahead.
more Francis Yaki wrote a number of some of the more defining essays that have created the modern dissident right, or the new right as it is now, because it's not dissident anymore, it's in power. Um,
Hmm.
he is specifically brought up. So here's a book that I would actually recommend to people. There's a book called, I believe it's The World After Liberalism.
Okay.
Ooh,
Yeah,
relevant to my interests.
yeah. So I did a book review of it. It's on my Substack, and it's called A World After Liberalism. And it's a book that is effectively like the cliff notes for Spengler, Evola, Yaki,
Oh, wow.
and another one. I Again, I'm trying to remember who I read this last
And this is
summer.
written by Matthew Rose.
Yep. So it's written by somebody who takes on the perspective of a leftist who's trying to address the criticisms of that the right has against society, but in actuality, it's just a cliff notes. This is what this person said. This is what this person said. This is why they're important, and then he just forgets to criticize them.
Forgets, quote unquote.
Yeah, it's just, oh yeah, I forgot. I was going to be part of the book. I just didn't get to that part.
Okay, so
Um,
for
That's
listeners,
funny. That's funny.
Francis Parker Yockey, I'm sorry, born September 18th, 1917, died June 17th, 1960, was an American fascist and pan-European nationalist ideologue. That's what Wikipedia describes him
yep,
as.
yep.
So it's got to be good then. If
Right,
Wikipedia says that,
right,
then it's got to be fine.
and his seminal work or his big work is called Imperium: The Philosophy of History and Politics from
Mhm.
1948. Written under a pen name of Ulick Varange, and it argues for a pan-European fascist empire. Uh, I'm quoting Wikipedia, right?
I was going to say,
Mhm.
does it?
So Imperium presents an anti-Semitic theory of history, asserts that the Holocaust was a hoax, and is dedicated to the hero of the Second World War, meant to describe Adolf Hitler. So I'm pretty sure that this book is not on the banned books shelf at Barnes and Noble, guys.
Yeah, I
Okay.
suspect it's not. Uh, the other book that I always get Francis Yaki and Sam Francis confused, but Sam Francis is the other one that I'd highly recommend getting on your. I'd highly recommend putting Sam Francis on your shelf. He wrote Leviathan and Its Enemies.
Okay, I have read Leviathan and His Enemies, so I have read that one, which is great. Um, Yeah, so we don't read Yaki in philosophy courses, right? So I don't even think most philosophy professors have even heard of him. They probably have never even heard of like Jared Taylor or any of those guys. But yeah, that's interesting because we don't even talk about like some of the more middle ground kind of philosophers like Byung-Chul Hall, Byung-Chul Byung-Chul Han. I mean, crap.
Hmm.
I never even heard of Ernst Jünger until in the last decade or so, I shifted into the internet world, right? And he was
Mhm.
new to me, and overall, he's got some very uh, kind of huggy leftisms, especially in his later life. But
This conversation is reminding me a lot about how you got me into Mishima earlier this year. And when I was reading his stuff, it's like, oh, he's just a Japanese guy. He's
right,
just like he just remembers the old ways.
yeah, he's just a Japanese.
He's not ultra, Wikipedia ultra nationalist, restore imperial. No, dude, he's just pre-Meiji restoration. That's all
Yeah.
he is.
But
It's no big deal. It's no big deal.
you can always like, you can use the fact that he was a homosexual as like a defense against,
Yeah,
the
right.
left. You're
No,
like,
it's okay. He wants to restore the emperor, but he likes cock, so
yeah.
it's fine.
And,
To be fair, there's a bunch of Roman
Fine.
emperors that also liked cock. So
Yeah. See,
yeah.
the imperial project is going to be great because when you're in charge, you can like cock and no one can say anything to you.
well,
Right.
so here's the thing: is that the American leadership class is going to treat Europe the same way that the Romans treated Greece.
Oh, thank God. That's
Right.
fantastic. I'm about that. Let's go.
Well, look,
That'll be
as a
funny.
European, as a European
We're
born
gonna steal.
American,
We're
as
gonna
a
steal all
European
their
born
shit
American,
and call it ours.
I have faith that deep down in my people's genetic ethnic makeup, right, is that we tend to be psychotic, violent warmongers, right? And I have a feeling that a violent civil war type environment, like situation, is going to develop first in Europe before it'll ever happen again in the United States.
Agreed.
I think that we are a lot more prone towards outbursts of, ethno-nationalist violence than Americans ever have
That's
been
true.
or will be, and I
Yeah,
think
100%.
you're gonna see that happen there first. I mean, technically, you're seeing it happen in Ukraine, um, which is let's be honest. I mean, it is more of a civil war than an actual full-blown like war between two
Well, that's kind of
opposing.
what the World Wars were. It was just
Right,
European civil wars. You know what I
right. They
mean?
just drug everybody else into their giant
Yeah,
civil war.
right. Well, because everybody else was in their empire. But
Right.
anyway,
But I think you're going to see a lot more ethnic violence and conflict if the EU collapses, which,
yeah,
we'll see how
It's
that
looking
turns
like it
out.
might.
Right.
yeah.
I mean, so everybody's terrified of Russia right now, and so they're basically trying to hand Germany the keys of the kingdom again. And
That
then
won't end.
Germany's sitting there going, "Is like, I just want it in writing, guys. You want us to march through Poland and invade Russia?
We just want it in writing, just so we're 100% clear
Just so
that
we're clear, you're
when it goes
inviting us to
tits
do that."
up, when it goes tits up, it's not our fault.
Yeah,
I support American disinvolvement from Europe,
100%.
not from an American chauvinistic idea, which I do believe in a lot of that. I think that I'm more of an isolationist when it comes to my own personal belief, right? But I
Western
see
Hemisphere supremacy.
Right. But I see a benefit from my European perspective, which is I think that the American military industrial complex props up a managerial class in Europe that would not otherwise be in charge if they didn't have the American empire backing them, right?
Yeah,
These European leaders are mandarins basically coasting on the support and military might of the American empire, and when they are gone, when that power goes away, they will realize that there's nobody standing behind them to protect them. And you'll have an actual true, more democratic, or at least more will of the people situation in Europe. Because right now, that entire state is supported by American industrial and military might. And when you take that away, they're not going to have any legs to stand on. And you'll have a realignment that creates governments that are really from the bottom up, as opposed to they're basically they're satrapies that are set up by the post World War II American empire. That's my opinion on Europe.
I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I think Europe is going to end up right now. A number of European countries are in the process of transitioning from a developed country to a developing country.
Right.
The Kingdom, in particular, is in
Ooh.
some of the worst economic and social straits of any modern nation in modern history.
Well,
Um,
that's what you get for trying to leave the EU.
Oh, no.
I
Where's
think
where's the lie though? Where's the lie though? I
There,
really
it's
think a lot
true.
of what's
They're
going
being
I think a
punished.
lot of what's going on in Britain is just it's this
they're
is what you get for
punishing the
Brexit. Yeah,
yeah
this is what you
they're
get for
punishing the
Brexit.
British. They're
100%.
going to destroy your country.
They,
Um,
they have. They really have
they
in so
have
many ways. It's
the UK
crazy.
is destroyed. The UK is a third world nation with a first world city in it.
Right.
And
It's
we'll see
really
how long
wild.
that lasts.
It's really wild to just for a second to pause and be like, yeah, the British are gone.
Yeah, they're gone.
It's not a
Um,
thing anymore.
if I were ever,
Not really.
I would legitimately consider visiting the UK because it would be hilarious to me if one of their police officers comes up and they're like, "Oh, you can't say that." I'm like, "Yeah, but your laws are dumb. I don't respect them, and if you touch me, I'll kill you."
So I have
Hi, if I'm an American, I have
I'm an
several assault
American. I do
rifles
not
in
give a
my coat
fuck.
right now.
I have a
Yeah.
family. I have a cousin, and she lives in England right now, and she lives there because her husband he works in media, and he got a job there temporarily to go to do media stuff, and she hates it. She despises it. She thinks it's the worst place she's ever lived, and she can't stand it. She
I
goes
wish I could.
she leaves every chance she gets,
I
and
wish.
goes back to
Sorry.
the continent, every chance she gets, and
Yeah.
it's like. I understand, she's like said it's like a miserable weather and the people suck and the food sucks and it's gross and crimey and stuff. And, she's like, I can't wait till his contract's over so I can go back home. You know what I mean? Right? Like, it's like, it's
I wish
interesting.
I wish I could summon my ancestors and be like, you guys made the right call coming over here. Let me tell you what. And they'd be like, what happened? Yeah, let me get you caught up in the last 400 years of history.
Right. So
Yikes.
Copernican, yeah, I'd be like, good job, guys. Like, you left
Thank you
that
for
fucking
that. Yeah,
shithole,
thank you for that.
Thank you so
You know
much.
what? You know what? In 16 in 2038, I'm gonna celebrate the arrival of my family in North America. I'm gonna throw a big party.
Right.
Oh, that'd be
That'd be
fun.
fun. That actually would kind of be cool now
I
that
think on
I'm
my
pausing.
dad's side, we go back
It'd be
to
fun.
like the 1600s in North America.
Yeah, man. 17th century crew. Let's go.
My family, we go back to me.
Hell yeah, brother.
I'm the
Hey, you know
first.
what? You're as American as anybody. All right.
Yeah,
By
sure.
virtue of being an asshole.
Right, exactly. On my wife's side, they're late uh 19th century Irish. So
Nice.
they came in there. They're gangs in New York type
Yeah,
Irish,
same here. Same
Nice.
here.
and then
Yeah.
some pre-war Polish is what she's got on her side of the family.
Oh, lovely. Lovely.
Uh,
Yeah, my family's been in the U.S. for on my dad's side, my family's been in the U.S. long enough that the ethnic group I identify with on his side is Appalachian.
Beautiful. That's
Which
fantastic.
oddly enough, like my grandmother lived 50 miles from where JD Vance grew up. So um
That's
I
crazy, man.
yeah,
See, like I'm a suburban kid, from outside Cleveland, but like my dad grew up like down around, oh God, what is it? Ironton down that
Mhm.
way, then moved north, and like all my dad's side of the family is all through Pennsylvania and Ohio, and outside Columbus is the guy who
Mhm.
got our side of the family out to this part of the world. But
well,
yeah,
I was
man, I got a
I
little
was
Appalachian back
nervous.
there.
I was nervous moving down to the south here in South Carolina, in between Savannah and Charleston. These old old southern cities
Oh
that,
yeah, dude.
and I thought I was going to encounter all these guys that are like, my great great grandfather, was at the secession tree and did that. But I'm slightly disappointed that everybody from that lives here is from fucking Ohio. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, oh my God, like, is there, I've lived in South
Ohio
Carolina.
Imperium.
Dude, I have
Ohio
lived in South
Imperium, it's
Carolina
coming.
for almost 3 years now, and I think I've met two people from like South Carolina. Everybody that lives here is from somewhere else. And it's interesting how there's a complete population displacement of, these, I'll see somebody walking around with like a South Carolina, like Gamecock, like college sweatshirt or something like that. I'm like, oh
Yeah,
yeah,
man.
are you from South Carolina? Oh no, we moved here from Ohio like 10 years ago. I'm like,
Now listen. In 100
Ohio's a weird
years,
place.
with Copernican's whole like monarchy and imperial thing or whatever,
right.
it's going to have the Buckeye dynasty. All right, it's going to go down in history as the Buckeye
Yeah,
dynasty.
you guys are
Watch.
everywhere. You guys are like a locust.
Founded by by Vance the First.
I could
Like,
see that. I could see that.
right.
Um, well, if you read Vance's book,
I haven't yet. No,
okay, so
I've heard quite a bit. A couple
I
buddies of
picked it
mine have
up
read
and
it.
read it when he was when he became the VP nominee because I'm like, all right, I got to know who this guy is. So he wrote
Yeah.
the book when he was like 30, 31, 32. And I think he wrote it because he was dealing with a bunch of fucking New York Harvard types all the time.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, well, we'll just institute more programs. And he's like, that's not how it fucking works. And so he finally like broke down and wrote an entire book to describe to them what life is actually like for most Americans. And they're like, wow, we should make a movie out of that. Because
Right.
they are so
Because of
fucking
course.
disconnected from the rest of the culture. But it does mean that he was actually quite honest about a lot of stuff when he wrote it because he wasn't a
Yeah.
major political figure back then.
Yeah.
And
No, I mean I lived that. Like I
mhm.
took my wife up to Ohio for the first time last Christmas. We drive up there and we get first rest stop in Ohio. The methadone emergency kits are empty. I kick open my driver door and there's a pile of cigarettes. Somebody literally chain smoked through 2 cigarette packs just right there in the parking lot, like melted snow with shit in it and
Mhm.
everything. It's just like fucking Ohio. Goddamn. All right,
Right.
guys, let's go. Here we
But
are.
yeah, no, I think as somebody whose family is like actually been Appalachian, I I don't need to read the book. I know those
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Right.
But the book
Oh
isn't
yeah.
really for me. It's for the people who've
Yeah.
never who don't realize that the United States does not consist of New York, um, Los Angeles, and a brief airport between the two.
Right.
Yeah.
And I
Exactly.
remember that Vance used to be like a kind of the darling of the left for a while. I remember he was being trotted around, and it was like, oh, here's this guy of like the kind of like the moderate, middle left, and how he was, like he's showing in the anti-corporate kind of lifestyle of like the middle American and the kind of guys that always vote for the wrong person even though they're getting shit on and that type of thing. And he was, you know, for a while like they liked him a lot, and now he's basically the devil, Hitler, that kind of
The
stuff.
left has no fucking idea how lucky they are that Trump chose Vance as the VP. They are so lucky.
Right.
Because Vance is old enough that he still believes in an American exceptionalism style Americana. And if Trump had picked somebody older, that person would not then be the next one in the running for the presidency. They would have a younger guy.
Right.
And if
Right.
Trump had picked somebody just like 4 years younger than Vance, he doesn't have to be a lot younger, but like 4 or 5 years younger than Vance, then that person will get into power and he will leverage the entire apparatus of the state to eliminate leftism down to the last fucking 16-year-old with blue hair.
Right. I mean, look,
Because people in like at age 37 and younger, like it's no fucking prisoners. We have had so much of their shit. We've dealt with their shit through the GWAT, and we've dealt with their shit for decades, and we are sick of their shit. And eliminating them to the last is completely justified in the minds of people under the age of 37.
well, absolutely.
Francisco Franco is a Zoomer.
Right.
Yes.
Well, I mean, for
That's
Is
what I'm
a
picturing.
conservative Zoomer. Yes.
it's interesting
Yep.
because Vance is actually a year younger than me, right? And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of his, he was in the Marine Corps around the same time I was in Afghanistan, and I think he was an Iraq guy instead of an Afghanistan guy, and I see a lot of my earlier view beliefs basically in him, and it's interesting that he's technically the first um, politician in power that is very much my generation. He's
Yeah.
my dude. He's a me. I actually fully understand. The fact
Yeah.
that he's so well versed in using Twitter and X or whatever, and the internet, and he doesn't look at He's married to an Indian woman and he has, mixed race children, and that's not a huge deal in the same way it would be for older people or, technically younger people on the internet, right? Um, and it's very interesting that he is my generation and he is very moderate compared to what I think that the younger generation is. I think you're right.
Yeah, he's super moderate.
I think some of the people I work with, I work with old people and young people. I work with all ages, right? And it's a great opportunity for me because I get to like see some of their beliefs, and some of the most extreme like right wingers I know are in their early 20s, mid 20s, and they're as extreme,
And
if
they're like,
not
don't worry, you're going to get more conservative as you get older.
right,
Oh,
right,
really?
exactly.
It's like
When
I'm already a Black Templar,
yeah,
if
when
you're
I
familiar with the
grew up,
40K reference.
when I'm growing up, when I'm in high school and in my 20s, right? Uh, I never knew anybody that was conservative. You had the occasional like edgelord libertarian type, who was into like Ayn Rand and that kind of shit. But for the most part, the only conservatives like you met in my generation, especially in Southern California, were like the really dorky, like born again Christian types that
Mhm.
like nobody wanted to hang out with because they're really dorky born again Christian types. And all those guys are now like ultra liberal, by the way. Like everybody that I knew that was a born again Christian from that era has become like a blue haired super liberal now in their 40s, right? Which is an interesting phenomenon to actually kind of look into. But all the, now when I meet young people though, they're the exact opposite. They're freaking like I'm like, oh man, you're a right wing extremist. Jesus Christ, dude. You know what I mean? Like what? And I'm not talking about like guys in South Carolina. I'm talking about in California. The people I knew in California before moving here were like, oh Jesus, man, I couldn't have hung out with you when I was young because you would have been way too conservative for me. And you're basically like there's going to be a shock for a lot of people, a lot of these older boomer types or boomer adjacent types, when this young generation grows up a little bit and starts becoming really more political because they're not into the
They're
shit.
not in the mood. They're not in the
Not in the
mood.
mood, right? Because they've been shit on the whole time, and you're not going to sell them on sending all their money to, foreign countries to,
Yeah.
trans children or whatever, because they can't even afford to rent a room, let alone, buy a house or anything like that, like the previous generation did. Um, Now, Copernican, we're getting close to the end, our usual cutoff
Mhm.
time. But I did want to bring one more main topic. I was going to bring up Cyberpunk, and you wrote a piece on Cyberpunk, but I actually want to talk about something else, and I'm sorry for the listeners because I know that they all love Cyberpunk. Um, I mean, look, it's the greatest science fiction genre there is. I'm sorry. But what I really want to talk about is kind of go off on the next step, right? One of the things I've been thinking about is like what keeps us from having children? This natalism issue that we have in our country, right? And it's something I've been kind of tossing around in my head a lot, and I've heard lots of different opinions. And in my view, because I am a father and I do have a 6-year-old right now, and I had a kid later in life in my mid 30s. Um, I think that one of the main issues, and people had shot back at me a bit and disagreed with me. One of the main problems is I think there's a two faceted issue, right? One issue is a financial issue that right now it is very difficult financially to have children, all right? And no matter what you say, whether the very Christian type of people will say something like, well, just you have to do it. People do it in poverty all the time. Yes, you are correct, but raising kids in poverty sucks, right? The other thing, and what I think is the main issue, is safety, right? There's a problem with safety in our country right now that makes raising children very difficult unless you have a lot of money to use to protect them, right? And what I mean by that is I was born
Well, I
uh,
would first start by countering real quick. You don't need a lot of money, you need a lot of resources.
correct. That's a
There's
better
a
way of
there's an
saying it.
important distinction because social resources are applicable there.
Right. Right, and that's what I meant. That's kind of what I'm going to work into. Let me quickly finish real fast. So I was born in Eastern Europe in Romania during Ceausescu's like very totalitarian communist reign in the 80s, right? But there wasn't a lot of money. There was bread lines. There was all the ills of living in a communist country, right? but there was a positive environment to raise children, right? Because the streets were safe. Kids could go and play at the park, right? There was family members around, there was community around, right? It was safe. I don't have that for my daughter, right? Even moving to, even moving from Southern California, which is a freaking shit show to raise children unless you're exceptionally wealthy, to South Carolina, there is still a high amount of crime out here. For example, one of the problems we have is that the middle schools in our area are rated horribly, right? Not because of lack of funding, but because of the crime. There was literally a murder in one of the middle schools in our town. This is small town, South Carolina. There was a murder, right? And it was a gang-related murder from Guatemalans, right? And nobody wants to send their children to public school. So our choices are either pay a ludicrous $20,000 a year for private school or homeschool, right?
Yep.
And that is a significant resource drain on a family that cannot afford it, right? I can afford to send my daughter to private school, and it's a huge, like, what do you call it? Like sacrifice on our part as a family, but I can't do 2 kids and I can't do 3 kids. You know what I mean? And it's very difficult to do that. And when people say, oh, well, just homeschool, well, I'm sorry, but not everybody can homeschool, right? Like, not everybody can be a good teacher, and not all children are amicable to being homeschooled. And there's not that level of resources and support, right? And I think the problem is a safety problem because we don't live in a safe society. You can be poor. If you're poor and safe, you can have children, right? If you're, if you're rich and there's no safety, you can have children because you can afford to create a safety bubble using your money. But right now, a lot of people have neither. They have neither safety and community and no money. So I think that's a big key problem that we need to address. What do you think about that?
I think that safety is a side effect of modern culture. Historically, people have lived in much less safe environments than they do now. So the real issue is that one, there's a new social standard for having children. And two, I found an interesting correlation. So I wrote an article last autumn. Let me find it. I end up often re-referencing my stuff. I wrote an article last Friday, it was last summer, might have been last summer. The reasons for demographic decline. I published it back in October. And I found an interesting correlation that attaches to child rearing. So one interesting correlation I have found is that the fertility rate seems to drop precipitously once a critical percentage of the population lives in urban areas.
Okay.
So it depends on which area. I think in France, it was around 73% of the population in an urban area in 1976, their fertility rate dropped below replacement. In Mexico, it happened when their population density hit 81% urban. In Japan, it happened at 75% urban. In Russia, it happened at 73% urban. And in South Korea, it happened at 63% urban. So I think urbanization creates a perpetual high stress social environment. And in a perpetual high stress social environment, it's much more difficult to perform child rearing, and there's a whole lot less space to do it. I also think that it sort of creates a downward spiral in that once the majority of the population, or once a significant minority of the population is not having kids but is spending money, what you get is like restaurants start to cater to people without kids because they spend more money. Parks will cater to people without kids. And then that makes it, again, more difficult to rear kids because the economy is no longer geared toward people who have kids.
Right.
And in a lot of urban areas, so urban areas in the United States have fallen off a cliff in terms of their reproduction. Rural areas in the United States are still above replacement. So a small town, you're going to have more kids floating around than you will in a city, basically everywhere in the U.S. Historically, cities have always been population sinks, and that is true now. It was only for a brief period in like the between 1900 and 1980, like for 80 years or 60 years or whatever the actual period was, that urban areas produced more children than people
rural
who died
areas.
in them. Yeah.
Right.
Than
Hmm.
not than rural areas, but produced more children than deaths.
Okay.
Um,
Above
So it's a meat
replacement.
grinder.
replacement. Yeah.
Right.
They're meat grinders.
Yeah. Well, historically it was because of disease, and now it's because of low fertility.
Well, what's the
So
difference?
right.
I'm kidding slightly, but making a little Teddy K joke there.
Yeah.
But yeah.
In the United States, it was at 73.6% of the population entering urban environments that the fertility rate dropped below replacement. The most the state in the United States that has the highest fertility rate, guess what it is?
Utah.
No, actually, close. South Dakota.
Okay.
Oh,
That's like a per
Very rural
capita.
state.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's per capita, obviously,
Right.
not the highest total, but yeah, but that is the highest fertility rate in the US, according to this study that I found published by somebody. South Dakota was the highest at 2.06, just barely above replacement. Everywhere else in the US is below replacement. So I do think safety is an issue, but it more has to do with tribe being an issue. The issue, because safety's always been an issue for kids. Like the murder rate in the United States is actually quite low in comparison to what it has been historically.
Right.
Especially it's low compared to what it's been when we've had higher fertility rates. I think the major loss is tribe.
I agree.
And that's one of the reasons why I support building intentional communities, because it allows you to reestablish a sense of tribal identity, even in urban areas and easily in rural areas. The proposition in urban areas being, again, the Hasidic Jews of New York have done an excellent job maintaining a high fertility rate.
Right. Because tribe, right, in a way nullifies the safety concerns, right?
Yes.
If you live in a neighborhood where you know all the neighbors and you all share a common cultural and philosophical ideal, you know everybody. One of the most difficult things. So you're absolutely right about the spiral you mentioned about the cities. I lived in California. California is a completely unfriendly area to raise a child in because nothing is for them. Everything is geared towards dogs and adults adults with dogs. The parks aren't for children, they're for adults and their dogs, or for bums shooting up, and
America.
it is a place where you feel embarrassed to take your kid anywhere because nothing is for them, and it basically locks you into a world of, private space only with your kid, and you become isolated from the greater community, what greater community there even is to begin with in Southern California, which is almost non-existent, right? And then all the places where you can take your kids are not safe. So because they're not safe, you don't go there, you don't have community, so you basically, to have a child in Southern California is to lock yourself away, basically. And nobody wants to do that. There's no incentive to have a kid socially or economically in a place like that. Here in South Carolina, it's a lot better because there's parks and there's tons of people with families. Maybe there's not a great community, but it's still much better than, Southern California. But you are absolutely right. A lot of the downsides of having a kid are eliminated with the idea of tribe. I fully agree with you, because you can trust your kid playing on the street if you know all your neighbors, which you, to a certain
I can
degree.
actually give an example that I think is I thought about it at the time because I had a few minutes to think at the time, but it was a fascinating thought when it comes to community. I was at a local church, the one that I regularly go to. I have a number of friends that go to it. And one of the people there, I know him relatively well, but I don't think I've ever been to his house. He's a community member. I know him relatively well. We've interacted dozens, if not hundreds of times at this point, but I haven't been to his house. He hasn't been to mine, that kind of thing. But we both have kids, right? And this guy gets in a car accident on the way to church. Now, his wife and his kids are already at the church. And his wife has to run out to go and help him deal with the car accident. So I think grandma's there or something, or a family friend is there watching the kids. She's a middle-aged woman is sitting there watching these two little kids wiggling around the pews while a sermon is hopefully going off. And so she runs out, and I'm looking around and I'm like, okay. So me and another guy who's a friend of mine, and we both know the father of these kids about equally well. We go and sit down with his kids because he's got a little toddler there and a little baby there. And I just hope that if I'm ever in that sort of situation where something happens to me, that within 60 seconds or 2 or 3 minutes, there's two guys with firearms on them, and one of them with like a military background sitting next to my kids, making sure everything's safe.
Right. Right.
And that's just not something that you get in most environments. But that's something I participated on in the side of one of the guys who sat down with the dude's kids. Is that's what you get from tribe is you can say something's happened, I need to go. And I will trust, and I can trust that somebody here is going to, shed blood before anything happens to my kids.
Right.
And that's not
It's
something
not
that
even
you can get in most urban areas.
Right,
it's
you
not
can't.
even that. It's you don't even think that. You just
Mhm.
hey, I got to go deal with a thing. All right, man, no problem.
Yeah,
And it's
I
like
mean, most
it's
people don't think about it.
boom.
It's something I think
Yeah,
about
it's
because
not
of
even
my
self-aware of it.
philosophy
It's
background. But yeah,
yeah, man. That's
Right.
fantastic stuff though. That's
No,
great.
it is. And,
That makes me so happy to hear.
I maybe I would say I'll throw in a quick story myself, which is in a way very similar. And it actually, now that I think about it, it's kind of uh, an example of the kind of community you're talking about. We got invited. We made some friends down here in South Carolina, and we got invited to go to a wedding uh, up in Pennsylvania, in Western Pennsylvania. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. Let's do it. Let's hop in the car and take a trip to Western Pennsylvania. I've never been. Check it out. So we drove, from South Carolina through North Carolina, through West Virginia, and into, Virginia, and then Pennsylvania, right? And the family that we went to go to the wedding for, they're all friends. There's like maybe like three families that are friends, and their children live down here. And we went up there, and they all have farms and farmland next to each other, and they
Mhm.
raise cows, and they've known each other for like 100 years, man. These guys,
Yeah.
right? Like they're all friends. Like all their friends were there. The entire town was there for the wedding, and they were basically like, "Oh, that's Sam's house. That's Steve's house. Blah blah blah's house." And he lived here with us during when he was going to college, and then he came back,
Mhm.
and this is where him and his family live, and he lives in his grandma's house after she passed away, and I was like, "Holy crap, man!" I was so jealous of these guys, because I didn't have
Mhm.
that, my unrooted urbanite family, and it was so wonderful. And there's children running everywhere, and they had their wedding on their own land, and they had like a little creek running through it. It was just this beautiful thing, and I was like, man, like how great would it be to have this, where like I felt like,
Yeah. How do
I
I
could.
get this?
Yeah, how do I get? The whole time we were there for a week, and I just let my daughter run around in like the woods, chasing,
Mhm.
playing with the other 20 kids that were there, all her age, and they were running around like fishing and canoeing and just chasing cows around and donkeys and stuff. And I'm like, geez, man, like here I grew up in my urbanite box of concrete, and these guys are living paradise out here, and you're right. That's exactly how you get this safety, So I think that when we talk about, natalism and trying to promote, improvement of, people having kids, we have to talk about this kind of stuff. We have to go, what can we do to provide that level of tribe to people? We can't just
Mhm.
expect people to pop out kids, because then you have
Yeah.
more disconnected bugmen,
Well, then to be honest, if you have kids in this day and age at this time in human history, we're going through a Darwinian bottleneck right now, a social Darwinian bottleneck, but a Darwinian bottleneck nonetheless. And by having kids, you have a dramatically disproportionate effect on the future in comparison to what you would have had 50 years ago, or what you will probably have in 100 years hence.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely.
I think a big part of it too is there's no easy answer. We're living in the wreckage. We're living in the twilight of liberalism, where if we just apply the correct bureaucratic or ideological framework, it'll fix everything. No, no, no. You have to move somewhere. You have to be somewhere. You have to promise never to leave, and you have to put in the time, put in the work, and there's no magic trick. Just you have to be
Yeah,
a normal
and
human and
it's
stay somewhere.
it's expensive, and
Yeah.
your
Like
income and quality of life will not be as high as they theoretically could be if you had a good
yeah.
job in a big city.
Yeah, you're
But
moving around and willing to go where the work is and
yeah,
all that traditional crap. I mean,
but you get
it's
roots,
yeah, and it takes
people,
forever.
and it takes years to get roots,
Yeah,
many years.
you want to talk about resources? How about the rest of your goddamn life?
Right.
Hmm.
There
Well,
you go.
it's interesting because this is something that's going to be more and more of a topic coming down the line because I'm turning 42 next month, right? I'm approaching that big 4-2, and most of my friends and most of my friends and most of the friends of my wife, who's 5 years younger than me, are approaching the same age. I'm kind of on the older end of my friend group for the most part, and I have a lot of friends that I grew up with that are childless, and just the other day, very close friend of my wife, who she's a fantastic woman, um, called my wife and they had a long conversation. And, she's having a bit of a midlife kind of crisis of meaning, and she's been married for a while, but she's childless and she'd never had kids and she's approaching 40. And it's stressing her out because she doesn't know, she's facing a very like existential kind of crisis at this point of like what am I doing, what do I do, and I've noticed that more and more of my friends are going through this right now, and I've had family members that are going through this right now where they've decided not to have kids and now they're pushing their 40s and in their early 40s, and they're freaking out, culturally and like spiritually. And I think that's something we're going to see a lot more problems with in the very, very near future. Because I think my generation, well, mine and yours, Fisto, right, are
Yeah.
the first ones that really bought into the do not have kids. The Gen Xers had kids, man,
Mm.
okay, right? But our generation is the first one that was like, no, we're not having kids, and we actually meant it. And now we're starting to doubt it because we're elder millennials, and we're really seeing we're going to see the spiritual effect of being childless in our 40s, and it's going to happen very
Yeah,
soon.
Yeah.
I've heard that there was an article on Substack that said it relatively succinctly, when it was talking about like the place of women in our society. And one of the bits of advice it gave you is if you work in a field that involves like having an HR lady, you probably need to find a different field because you're going to be in the splash zone for the cultural catastrophe that is none of them having had kids.
Right, right.
Oof. Well, glad I got out of that.
Yeah,
Jesus.
Yeah, no, I mean that's true because these people, they're gonna take their neuroticism and their existential dread at not having kids, and they're gonna funnel it into all kinds of crazy shit. Some of them are
like
gonna do the
burning
right
down
thing.
Tesla dealerships.
Right, right. Some of them, all right. Not everybody should have kids. Okay, not everybody should have kids. There's plenty of space in the world for childless
I'm
philosophers
I'm
and
I'm
whatever.
completely okay with the worst parts of our civilization weeding themselves out at a genetic level, but
Right. No, me
still,
too.
it's going to be rough.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's why from a religious standpoint, I am against birth control and abortion, but from a cultural standpoint, I'm kind of like, it's okay. Go ahead and stop yourself. We don't need more of you on this planet. Uh,
Here's how it is. I think that abortion is like, I don't want to use this word sin, but pretty applicable there. But it's an extremely unvirtuous thing to do.
right.
It's an immoral thing to do. At the same time, I'm not going to stop people that I despise from doing horribly immoral things to themselves and also making them so they will never be a problem for my kids.
Right. I mean,
Your Willy Wonka sitting there going, "No, please
please
stop."
don't eat the
No,
gum.
don't do
Violent.
that.
No, please
That's
don't.
wrong.
No, I mean, and like as much as I feel bad for saying this, I fully agree with you. And it's interesting. I was a I was a abortion skeptic during my atheist liberal stages of my life, and I obviously like now have a different moral perspective on it from a Christian perspective, but I still have to admit I have a hard time like pulling the lever there, going, man, do I really want to stop some of these people from going ahead and ending their genetic lines because I just I don't want them in the future. I don't want their offspring interacting with my offspring because they're obviously defective, and it's kind of a moral conundrum that I guess we have to kind of discuss in the future, right?
Y- Let me put it this way. I'm completely okay with leaving that one for the next generation. I think that they'll make the right decision. And I think that by not stressing out over it too much now, they'll be in a position to make a better decision.
Right, I agree with you on that one. I do. All right, Copernican, coming to an end. It's about dinner time for my family. Probably dinner time for Fisto too.
Yeah,
Uh,
movie time. Actually, the wife would like some quality
Ah,
time,
there
so
you
I'm
go.
I'm I'm
Nice.
gonna I'm gonna oblige her.
what are you guys watching?
That I don't know. There is a goofy Taiwanese drama that we wanted to check out just for the laughs
Nice.
because it's absolutely sounds bonkers. Either that or we might throw on Three Body Problem. I
The
don't know how it
film's okay.
compares to
The
the book.
book,
The film's okay. The book's better. All right.
all
Okay.
right. So
We figured get a taste of it together. You know what I mean?
I'll the film has amazing cinematography, which you need
Oh,
for this,
cool.
but the writing's just okay.
All
Um,
right.
and the what I would describe it as is the Netflix series was made on a budget, which
Ah,
leads to and it's got a little bit of woke bullshit in it, but not too much. My favorite character is still who he is. It's the police officer. He's perfectly cast, perfectly acted. That's exactly who that guy is. Um, but the world in the Netflix series is too small in comparison to the books. In the books, it's a lot bigger. Um, so it's not a small cast of like 8 characters in the books. In the books, we're talking like transnational, international, interstellar organizations with millions or billions of people as background characters and thousands of people in various positions of power as critical plot points. But the TV show does have great cinematography, and it doesn't do too badly when it comes to keeping to the spirit of the book, of the first book anyway. Um, so it's a fun watch. It's a fun watch, but the books are a lot chunkier, and a lot chunkier for a reason.
yeah.
Okay. So definitely read the
As
book
usual.
first. Read the book first, basically, like most things. Uh,
Like a proper person, not a Philistine like
right,
myself.
Well,
right.
I would recommend trying to read the first chapter of the books first, at least. But it works. Like the TV
Yeah.
show works. I just don't think they can make it work for the second season because they're doing it chronologically, and that's just going to be a huge mess.
All right.
Mhm. So yeah, we'll
Um,
see. We'll see what we watch.
so
But
besides that, besides your Substack writing, what would you have for our listeners to what do you recommend that they read from you, right? Your Substack pieces. Do you have anything new coming out soon? Do you recommend
Well,
anything?
I've got 3 projects that I'm kind of working on when it comes to writing. Um, one of them is the so my next article that I really want to do, um, 4 projects. The next article I really want to do is going to be on systems collapse, because I think a lot of people don't. There's an interesting interplay that goes on between social and resource systems in our society, and few people have a background necessarily to understand both. And I'm one of that relatively small number of individuals. Um, because you have to understand both the mining industry and the tech industry and sociology.
Right.
Um, so I want to do one on systems collapse because systems collapse is going to play some interesting and pivotal roles in the way our economy shifts over the next century or so. Um, then I want to do then I'm going to release before the end of the month, because I promised him, I'm going to release a review of the book The Bushido of Bitcoin, by Alexander Svetsky, which is a really interesting philosophical dive into some of the older moral systems and the way those are going to be the way those may be translated into future economic systems. So if we can actually adhere to sort of a proper warrior code as we transition to a feudal system, we'll end up having a much better society than if we don't. So I think Alexander Svetsky is actually quite onto something. So when I release his book review for the Bushido of Bitcoin, I would highly recommend people read that. And then the two private projects that I'm doing, and I will hopefully be starting to release one of them pretty soon here. It's pretty soon being like 6 months. Is there's a science fiction book that I've been working on that I'm 2/3 of the way through, sitting at about 60,000 words. And I do intend to start releasing chapters of it on my Substack here at some point.
Cool.
Once I've gotten the chance to finish it and then do some editing so I don't, so basically the second pass editing so I don't end up screwing things up badly on the Substack version. But I do intend to start releasing chapters of that on the Substack. And then there's one other project that I've been encouraged to get started. I haven't yet, but this is something that people should bother me about because it would be amazing. So if any of your listeners want to send me a message on Substack and be like, hey, you should get started on this project, I think it'd be great. But a friend of mine suggested a while back that I write a science fiction book that takes place in a post-feudal United States in like 150, 200 years. Okay. And all I've got for it really is the title and a good idea of what the first like chapter of the introduction is going to consist of. But the title of the book is Sir Cletus Clearwater, and it's about a knight for one of these like land-owning families for one of the counts, and his role with his like combat team and his AR-15 or variant firearm, variant chemical propellant rifle, just like we have now, and his night vision, getting into it with drones and doing like little raids on other powerful
Fiefdoms.
aristocratic families and fiefdoms in Nebraska.
Right. Well, that sounds interesting, man. That sounds great. And I would love to have you back on so we can talk about it. I had a whole list of things
that would be cool.
I wanted to talk about a lot of science fiction, fantasy, and type stuff. Well, not fantasy, but science fiction and some of the things you mentioned on your Substack. But we got kind of sidetracked with the politics, which is fine.
That happens sometimes.
When
I'd love to be back.
That would be great.
As soon as you start putting stuff out, we'll have you back in a few months, right? Because we were always looking forward to good conversations. But so you talk about science fiction a lot. What is your favorite science fiction writer?
All right. I'm gonna give you a couple. I really like Asimov. He came up with all of these original ideas, and he had the original collapse of empire in a science fiction sense with his Foundation series. So I really like Asimov. I really like Cixin Liu because he understands humanity and sociology so much better than so many other science fiction writers. If you want dumb fun, I recommend We Are Legion, We Are Bob. It is light science fiction that is just fun and silly. But it's fun to watch the author as you go through the books. Like the author's worldview changes from classic liberalism to we may have fucked up with the idea of liberalism.
That's interesting.
And the characters don't really reflect that clearly, but you can tell in the way that the story is like framed over time that the author's sort of going through an existential crisis over his moral position. And on top of that, it's like almost like Pulp Fiction. It's just fun. And then the author that a lot of people would probably have heard of, but probably haven't read, is I really like the Strugatskys, who are sort of the originators of the Soviet fiction genre.
Right, the Roadside Picnic, right?
Roadside Picnic, The Doomed City, I think is my favorite book by them. And I'm currently working on Monday Starts on Saturday.
Right.
And which, if you've ever read the SCP Foundation, is sort of the origin for that as a concept.
Right. And then Tarkovsky's movie Stalkers based on their work too.
Yep. And then the movie Stalkers based on Roadside Picnic, and the video game Stalkers based on the movie and the book.
Right. And if you haven't watched Tarkovsky, you should watch Tarkovsky. So that's great, man. That's good choices. I haven't read as much science fiction. I used to read a lot of science fiction. You know, I've read all the big stuff, all the Asimov, and I've read all the Dune and Hyperion,
Mhm.
and I read some of the big door stoppers. What was the one I actually really enjoyed? Pandora's Star and Judas Unchained. And I know Elfisto is a big fan of The Expanse.
Yes,
And,
that's my pulp.
I love The
That's my
Expanse.
pulp. That's my pulp angle. My favorites include Asimov. I read most all but the last book and a half of Foundation over the summer. I got to finish that this summer. Um,
Honestly, the last book is more of the publishers are giving me money, so I'm
yeah,
going to
I've
write
I've
another one.
heard that, and I kind of felt it, so that's probably why I trailed off. But my
It's
God,
fun.
I loved it. I mean, it's so fucking good. It's just the mentalists and all that stuff. I
Yeah.
love every bit of it. The dead hand of Selden.
yeah, so
Come on, let's go. It's
I've always
great.
been more into the schizo kind of sci-fi stuff, like
Yeah.
Philip K. Dick, schizo
Mhm.
sci-fi, and like cyberpunk. I like obviously like all the cyberpunk stuff.
I'm we've already been living it for years now. I don't want to read anymore.
Yeah, it's true. In a way, it's true. And I actually really wanted to talk about cyberpunk today, but we ran out of time.
We
And
just have to reference it. We just have to reference
we
it.
do have the references every single episode. Maybe I should write a
Mhm.
Yeah.
cyberpunk novel, but
You
Yeah, you
I
should.
should.
You should write a cyberpunk novel in the spirit of the Bob book, but about how your chosen love interest is wrong and you eventually come around to Pan Am Squad.
No,
That
it's
should
never
be your
going to happen.
book.
I think one of the best like post cyberpunk movies, science fiction movies out there is actually Demolition Man.
Oh,
Uh,
that's good. Yeah. Well, all
because
right. So here's something that I would love to read that nobody's written is I want a book that can transition from cyberpunk to solar punk in the same book
Ooh.
okay, that's interesting, all right?
because nobody's ever written something like that, but it's something that we desperately need.
Where things get
Hmm.
interesting and almost like pre-post apocalyptic, basically, or solar punk
Post apocalyptic.
post
Post. So
apocalyptic, yeah.
like so like you could do it where it's kind of in the realm of Foundation, but you take the
Yeah.
Expanse angle where it's how do you because the Expanse is fun because how do you get to Interstellar Empire? Nobody writes about that all
Mhm.
that much.
I mean, you
So
can
maybe
look.
it's kind of like that, a man on the ground
Yeah. Have you ever read
as
the
the
book?
post apocalypse happens.
Have you ever read the book, The Ecotechnic Future?
No.
No, no, I've never even heard of
Okay,
that
I reviewed that one. That would be a really good starting place for something like writing a cyberpunk book that can transition into post cyberpunk.
Post
Um,
cyberpunk.
yeah, into a post cyberpunk type of more holistic environment.
You know,
That's
That's something to think about.
yeah.
have you read Gene Wolfe? Have you read the Book of the New Sun?
I've not read the Book of the New Sun.
So, are you familiar with it though?
No.
Okay, so Book of the New Sun. So Gene Wolfe is a Catholic. He was a Catholic science fiction author. He was also the creator of Pringles, and his face is on the Pringles can. If you know the little
Yeah, yeah,
mustache
yeah.
guy, right? Supposedly, I guess maybe that's not true, but I think it's true. Um, and the Book of the New Sun is a trilogy, and it is a post far future post feudal world, right? Where it's basically Earth, but it's written like a medieval, Lord of the Rings kind of fantasy, right?
So
But it's
it sounds like a canonical for Leibowitz.
right. It's even more like feudal than that, right? And if you read it, it's a very difficult series of books, right? Like I would say a little bit higher level philosophically and religiously written than your average kind of science fiction or fantasy novel. But
Mhm.
if you read it properly from the right perspective, you realize that they're talking about like rocket ships and cloning and that kind of stuff. But from the perspective of a post feudal society that has forgotten all those things, you know what I mean? Um, so there's scenes where the tower takes off in a blaze of fire across the city, and you're like, what the hell is he talking about? But then you think, wait a
Mhm.
second, it's a rocket that's flying. You know what I mean? But they're describing it from the mindset of somebody that has no idea what this rocket is, and and it gets into very religious theology, and it's basically a Christ story. But they're a fantastic series of novels, and probably some of the best science fiction of the 20th century, up there with Dune and Asimov. So I highly recommend the Book of the New Sun. And there was also Peter Hamilton. He wrote a series of cyberpunk novels that are like they're British cyberpunk novels written in a post global warming kind of cyberpunk. Oh my God, my cat just ate all my knocked over my can of Zin and is about to eat some Zin right now.
Cat getting high.
I know it's gonna get all.
I think one of the most interesting things about cyberpunk and the way we interact with it now, I mentioned this in my article on the topic. It's kind of dead like the Western, but in my opinion, but I would a post cyberpunk or a book that goes from cyberpunk into well post cyberpunk, basically accentuating aspects of our society that need to be fixed, and then proposing methods on how to fix them, and as you say, something more like the Foundation series that's willing to move through deeper aspects of time. Um, I'm really interested in how such an author would view the methods by which we are going to end up using AI as a tool or being used by AI as tools.
Right, right. That's interesting. That's all like something that like I think we're due for a intellectual literary explosion. There's a lot of issues that have not been touched upon in fiction or in film and in art, and they're due to the fast changes. Like the artistic world hasn't caught up to the reality
It's so
of the
hard to
world.
write in a now.
It is absolutely
Because the now today is not the now of 4 years ago or 3 years ago.
right. We're
Yeah.
still stuck in the
Give
COVID
it 10 minutes.
stories right now. We're still stuck in the COVID stories, right?
Oh,
And it's
oh.
completely like the second you put something out with the kind of glacial pace of traditional publishing or even the film industry, it's almost impossible to approach things. You do have some interesting pseudo sci-fi kind of stuff in the film industry with the you had what is the movie with Demi Moore that came out just recently that was up for awards. Shit, I can't.
So you'll get a kick out of this. A couple of years ago, I was talking to my father, who is definitely in the boomer range, and he asked me, because we were talking about AI and technological development, when do I think the singularity is going to be? If there is a singularity, and if so, when do I think it's going to be? And so I responded by asking him, what do you think life is going to look like in a year?
Right,
And if you can't answer that question, this is the singularity.
right. Absolutely.
We have no ability to predict what things are going to look like in a couple of years,
Right.
politically or technologically.
And that's terrifying, right? In a way that's terrifying, right?
Do you mean that? Do you mean that with any kind of detail or the
I
mythic
mean,
shape
people
of
are
it?
probably going to still, in 1 year from now, people are probably still going to be using cell phones, and they're probably still going to be driving cars.
Well,
But
sure.
I have no idea what tech will look like or how far AI technology is going to go. I suspect they won't get to full AGI, but some people think they will.
Right.
I didn't think
Hmm.
they'd get this good. So,
I see. Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to see.
and then I don't know how it's going to be used. I don't know what percentage of people are still going to be employed in a year, and how many of them are going to be have their jobs lifted by AI systems.
Right. I mean, that's something that my own industry is facing right now, like getting replaced by it, and then like
It's yeah, I see that stuff even starting to filter into where I'm at. Even though it's a school, it's a rural high school, and I see people wanting to use AI for this and AI for that. It's like I'm going to be part of the 1% that hasn't had their brain turned to slop. Thank you very
right,
much.
right. All right, guys, it's almost
Anyway.
8 o'clock here.
Perfect.
All right.
Beautiful evening in South Carolina. Copernican, thank you for joining us. Fisto,
Yeah, man, real pleasure.
it's
Real pleasure. That was a
always
very cool
awesome.
conversation.
Right,
You
and
guys have a
I'll
great day. Thank you for having me
yeah,
on.
you're always
man.
welcome to come back on. I'd love to talk to you in a few months, and I'm going to keep reading all your articles. I'm looking forward to all the work you've kind of previewed for us today.
Yeah.
And
Thanks.
for all the listeners at home, please go ahead and find Copernican on Substack. I'm going to have the links on the post for the podcast episode. I absolutely recommend listening or reading his stuff because it's very thought provoking and very interesting. There is more. He's got more work than I could even like take notes on to talk about today. So unfortunately, we could have kept this podcast going for another like 6 hours and still had plenty of stuff to talk about. And also for listeners at home, if you do enjoy this, please like, share, and subscribe. That keeps us going, supports us, allows us to keep doing this every week. And like our goal is to have interesting conversation every week, and we're going to try to keep doing it until we eventually get tired of it. So once again, thank you and good night, guys.
Good night.
Good night.